We come to the first session where the question that we would like to pose to our panelists is, what are the laws and the policies that you have in place currently in your country which are around transgender or trans identity acceptance, and how do they go about fulfilling those promises? For that, I would like to open the discussion with Joya Sikdar from Bangladesh, and then we will move on with each speaker. So Joya আপা, আপনি আমাদেরকে একটু বলতে পারবেন আইনের দিক থেকে এবং যত পলিসি আছে সেটার দিক থেকে বাংলাদেশে এখন কি অবস্থা?
তো আপনি আমাকে প্রশ্ন করেছেন যে আইনের দিক থেকে বাংলাদেশের কি অবস্থা। তো আমরা যদি আইনের দিকটা ফলো করি তাহলে বাংলাদেশে 2013-তে একটা গেজেট আকারে ঘোষণা এসেছে। সেই ঘোষণাটা কিন্তু একটা মিনিস্ট্রি থেকে, একটা মন্ত্রণালয় থেকে, কিন্তু সেটাকে কিন্তু পার্লামেন্টারিতে কোনো বিল আকারে উপস্থাপন করা হয় না। যে পার্লামেন্টারি থেকে ঘোষণা করা হয়েছে যে ট্রান্সজেন্ডার জনগোষ্ঠীকে বা হিজড়া জনগোষ্ঠীকে হিজড়া লিঙ্গ হিসেবে স্বীকৃতি প্রদান করা হোক। এইটা গেল একটা বিষয়। আমি যেটা বললাম যে একটা গেজেট আছে। আর একটা বিষয় যেটা আমাদের এখানকার যে পাসপোর্ট আছে, পাসপোর্টের আদার্স নামের একটা অপশন, আদার্স মানে কি এক্সট্রা লেখা আর কি, মেল ফিমেলের পরে এক্সট্রা লেখা, এক্স একটা অপশন আছে। আর আরেকটা বিষয় হলো যে এখনকার সময় ব্যাংকিং লেনদেনে যে কাগজপত্র বা ডকুমেন্টস ব্যবহৃত করে, সেখানে আমি দেখলাম যে তৃতীয় লিঙ্গ লেখা, তৃতীয় লিঙ্গ শব্দটা সেখানে ব্যবহার করেছে। এছাড়া এনআইডি কার্ডের ন্যাশনাল এনআইডি কার্ডের যে ফর্ম, এনআইডি কার্ডে কোনো কিছু নেই, কিন্তু ফর্মের ভিতরে উল্লেখ আছে হিজড়া, লিখতে পারবে। এই বিষয়গুলি হচ্ছে বাংলাদেশের আইনগত একটা বিষয়, যে বাংলাদেশি গভর্নমেন্টের এটা হচ্ছে এই। তবে এই বিষয়গুলি একটু ডিফারেন্ট মিনিস্ট্রি ডিফারেন্ট ভাবে কাজ করছে। এই হচ্ছে অবস্থা। এর বাইরে আমি লিগ্যাল ব্যারিয়ার বলতে বাংলাদেশে আপাতত কিছুই দেখছি না, যে আইনগত অবস্থান। কিন্তু পরে আমাকে যদি কোশ্চেন করা হয় যে আইনগত বাধাগুলি কি, সেগুলি নিয়ে হয়তো আমি ডিসকাশন করব।
তো আমার একটা প্রশ্ন আছে এখানে আপনার জন্য, আমি ওটা ইংরেজিতে বলছি। সো there's no consolidation of affairs. So every department has a different identity being presented in legislation, in policy. How does that affect transgender people? মানে প্রত্যেকটা ডিপার্টমেন্টের মধ্যে তো এক জায়গায় বলছে তৃতীয় লিঙ্গ, এক জায়গায় বলছে এক্স, আরেক জায়গায় বলছে হিজড়া। তবে মানে কোথাও তো একটু ঐক্যতা আনতে হবে। তো আইনের চোখে কি মানে কোনো একটা শব্দ আছে যেটা দিয়ে সব জায়গায় নিজেকে পরিচয় দেওয়া যায়, কিংবা আইনের চোখে কোনো দরজা পাওয়া যায়?
আইনের দৃষ্টিকোণ থেকে কিন্তু এরকম কোনো বিষয় এখন পর্যন্ত আলোচনা হচ্ছে না, যে বাংলাদেশে ট্রান্সজেন্ডার বিলটা কিভাবে পাস করা হবে বা সেটাকে আমরা কোন দিকে নিয়ে যাব। ইদানিং আমরা কাজ করছি কয়েকটি অর্গানাইজেশন মিলে, তার ভিতরে ব্লাস্ট আছে এবং আইবোপ্রোন নামে একটা অর্গানাইজেশন আছে, তাদের সঙ্গে আমাদের কনসালটেন্সি হচ্ছে যে এই বিষয়গুলিকে আমরা কিভাবে বিল আকারে উপস্থাপন করতে পারি। কিন্তু এখানে এদেশে অনেকগুলি মতবিরোধের বিষয়ও রয়েছে। যারা হিজড়া কমিউনিটিতে বিলং করে তারা আসলে মনে করে যে হিজড়া স্বীকৃতিটা তাদের কাছে অনেক কিছু। আসলে আর আমরা যারা অ্যাক্টিভিস্ট হিসেবে কাজ করছি, আমাদের দাবি হচ্ছে না একটা গোষ্ঠীকে বা একটা জনগোষ্ঠীকে গভর্নমেন্ট এভাবে দেখছে, কিন্তু বাকিদের কি হবে, বা হিজড়া হিসেবে গভর্নমেন্টের জনগোষ্ঠীকে দেখলেও সেখানে কিন্তু তারা একটা মেডিকেল এক্সামের একটা জায়গা রেখেছে, যেখানে তারা প্রায় সময় বলে যে আসল এবং নকল। মানে তারা এখনো জানে না যে ট্রান্সজেন্ডার মানে কি, যে মেল বডিতে নিজেকে ফিমেল বলে দাবি করে বা ফিমেল বডিতে নিজেকে মেল বলে দাবি করে তারাই যে ট্রান্সজেন্ডারের অন্তর্ভুক্ত, এই বিষয়টা কিন্তু এখানে এখনো স্পষ্ট না। কেননা গভর্নমেন্টের যে ডকুমেন্টস আছে, যে মিনিস্ট্রি কাজ করছে, একমাত্র হিজড়া জনগোষ্ঠী উন্নয়নের জন্য সোশ্যাল ওয়েলফেয়ার মিনিস্ট্রি কাজ করে, কিন্তু তারা সেখানে যেসব কাগজপত্র নথিপত্র তৈরি করছে তাতে কিন্তু বোঝানো হচ্ছে যে এই জনগোষ্ঠীকে সেক্সুয়াল ডিসেবল হিসেবে দেখতেছে, যাকে বাংলায় বলে যৌন প্রতিবন্ধী। তো এই প্রতিবন্ধী হিসেবে তাদেরকে দেখা হচ্ছে। তো সেই ক্ষেত্রে এই স্বীকৃতি বা এই বলার জায়গা এটা কতটুকু কমিউনিটির পক্ষে ব্যবহার হবে, কমিউনিটির পক্ষে তো বিষয়গুলি সেই সঠিকভাবে ব্যবহার হচ্ছে না। যে ক্ষেত্রে গভর্নমেন্ট যে কোনো অপরচুনিটি হাতে নিয়েছে সেটাকে কিন্তু সঠিকভাবে বাস্তবায়ন করতে পারছে না। তো এই যে আইনের যে একটা ধারা, সেটাকে যদি আইনের মাধ্যমে পরিবর্তন করা হয়, তাহলে কিন্তু এই বিষয়গুলিকে স্পষ্ট করা যাবে, বা একটা ঐক্যতার ভিতর নিয়ে এসে যে এটাকে আমরা কিভাবে বাস্তবায়ন করতে পারি।
Thank you, Joya. I will now move on to Zainab Patel from India. Zainab, can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Hi, Zainab. So can you please tell us what the current situation is as far as laws, legislations, and policies are concerned in India, and how effective they are at the ground level?
So, very quickly, Deb, in terms of what has happened in India, there has been a very ardent civil society movement pressing for transgender rights. Uh, I'm not going to delve too much on the history, but I'm just going to say that uh, last year, in the winter session of the Parliament of India, a law was passed which was called the Protection of Transgender Persons' Rights. Now, the rules for these laws were notified only in September this year, around the end of September, by the focal ministry, which is called the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment. So, in India, we have a focal ministry identified by the government. We have a piece of legislation which has a significant amount of portion dedicated to discrimination, access to legal gender recognition, also kind of looking at reforms in other achievements. But there was one major problem with the act that was formed. In that act, there was a requirement for a mandatory medical examination, which which were also negated by the communities, by various groups of progressive politicians, by academics, by people working in the entire area of gender, health, and human rights. And for us, it also meant that this was an infringement on the constitutional right of bodily autonomy, the right to privacy. Also, because we wanted to look at this criticism actually becoming something like more thorough for the government to act on. And hence, now that the Act rules are formulated, we see that the district magistrate can now process application on grounds of legal gender recognition of your preferred gender identity on the basis of an affidavit. Prior to this, there were two other pieces of judgment. One, in 2014, we had the NALSA judgment, which was the National Legal Services Authority versus the Union of India, where a couple of trans people approached this authority asking them that it is within your mandate, within your constitutional framework to take up issues of different marginalized groups, and you can take suo motu cognizance of our issues, file a petition under a special justice litigation. And hence, there was a process which got involved with various UN agencies, development partners, community, which worked on creating that level of sensitization for the National Legal Services, which was a semi-autonomous body of the government of
Right.
India, to file this petition, taking the government of India to task. Now, this was when this judgment came out in 2014 in India. This was considered to be a hallmark judgment, not only in India, in South Asia and Southeast Asia, because I used to work with UNDP at that point of time as a regional policy analyst on human rights. And in about 2014 to 2017, we did not really have progressive legislation within the region which affirms your right of self identification. Everyone brought in various kinds of legislation, bringing in, some kind of medicalization, pathologization, uh, referrals, etc. So this was seen as a proactive piece of judicial reforms which could pave the way for legislative reforms coming in. Unfortunately, that judgment, which was a very wise judgment, but it was wise words in an old book, and it stayed as it is until the government was pushed into action to bring in this protection. So it took us 3 to 4 years of activism, judicial activism, community activism, and working with the bureaucracy to get the rules amended in such a way that it doesn't infringe into bodily autonomy or right to privacy. However, if I look at the situation, leaving this situation aside, There are many cases, all of the wins that we have secured in India,
Right.
or rather most of the world, are basically because of strategic litigations by the community, whether it is getting name change done in education records, whether it is challenging beggary provisions of the law, that although there might be decriminalization of gender identity, there are other punitive provisions in the law, anti-beggary, vulgar behavior, immoral behavior, immoral trafficking and prevention. So there are currently these kind of laws which still kind of are used, the various police acts in Karnataka, in Maharashtra, etc., which are used against people from this community, because especially for the
Absolutely.
transgender Hijra community who depend on begging and sex work as a way of economic livelihoods or survival, are constantly being targeted due to these laws. So there have been certain wins according in the Delhi High Court judgment of 2018, which decriminalized begging because a transgender was sent to jail again for begging. There are various pieces of legislation. There was a case in the Madras High Court where a transgender woman wanted to go and get her marriage registered under the Marriage Act. There was permission given to the registrar to register that marriage. So, and I think right now, as we speak, there are a couple of special justice litigations in the Delhi High Court challenging the marriage right to equality under marriage by a couple
Yeah.
of group of people. So there are various pieces of one is the legislative part, the second is the judicial reforms that are happening to various cases. There were court cases where the government was taken to task saying that COVID relief did not reach communities, make sure that it reached transgenders and sex workers. There are
That's
people who
something we'll
challenge.
actually come back to later, because
Yes,
that
but
is
I'm
an
just trying to say
extremely
that
important.
there are multiple pieces
Yeah.
of judicial reforms,
Mhm.
legislative reforms, and I would say
Right.
this as part policy, part programmatic, and part legislation is the formation of the National Council for Transgenders, which is basically a statutory body as part of the Protection of Transgender Persons Act. So this body basically is of regional transgender experts, subject matter experts, and various government folks, which convene regularly. We just had one meeting helping the government to strategically think tank and also look at grievance redressal from the communities on legislative policy and programmatic responses of the government. And this is also supposed to provide some roadmap to the government in terms of how do we look at development in a holistic manner, how do we look at inter-ministerial coordination, and how do we get the people's responses to reach the government.
Right.
Additionally, many states today have the transgender welfare boards. These are welfare mechanisms at the state level which provide grant and aid, skilling, entitlements, entrepreneurship opportunities for transgender. Now, some of these are more progressive than the others, some of them are slow, and we can talk more about it as we move ahead. But from a federal and a provincial structure, these are some of the recent happenings. We've also got the right to self-identify in our identity documents. So you have male, female, and
Yeah.
transgender in our national ID documents, in our passport, in our income tax filing documents, in some of the other documents as well, in some of the banking documents as well. But again, whether this is truly accessible without having to go any marker of gender
Yeah.
identification is a question. And this is something which we are trying to get eliminated through the enactment of and the implementation of the Protection of Transgender Persons Act.
And this is something that we will actually come back to in the next session as well, because
Sure.
what you've some very important points. We would thank you so much, Zainab, and now we will ask Bhumika from Nepal to shed some light on the current legal situation in Nepal around transgender identity and third gender identities.
Thank you, Devjyoti. So, well, Nepalको कन्टेस्टमा कुरा गर्नुपर्दाखेरि चाहिँ 2007 21 डिसेम्बरमा चाहिँ नेपालको सुप्रिम कोर्टले चाहिँ नेपाल सरकारलाई आदेश दिएको थियो कि नेपालमा चाहिँ यो तेस्रो लिङ्गी हरूको पहिचानको कुराहरू बोलेको थियो, जसमा चाहिँ तपाईको सम्पूर्ण विभेदकारी कानुनलाई खारेजी गरी समान कानुनको संरचना गर्नु भनेर आदेश दिएको थियो। अर्को चाहिँ जति पनि तपाईको यो थर्ड जेन्डर ट्रान्सजेन्डर साथीहरू हुनुहुन्छ उहाँलाई चाहिँ आफ्नै पहिचान अनुसारको नागरिकता उपलब्ध गराउनु भनेर चाहिँ नेपाल सरकारलाई आदेश दिएको थियो। तर नेपाल सरकारको हिसाबमा कुरा गर्नु पर्दाखेरि चाहिँ एकदमै साइलेन्ट र एकैचोटि 2013 मा आएर चाहिँ यो थर्ड जेन्डर समुदायको साथीहरूलाई चाहिँ अदर्स भनेर चाहिँ नागरिकता दिन चाहिँ थालेको अवस्था थियो हैन। र त्यसपछि लिएर चाहिँ अहिले चाहिँ नेपालमा जस्तो कुनै कानुन जस्तो कुनै पोलिसिजहरू चाहिँ राम्रोसँग तयार भएको अवस्था छैन। देशको मूल कानुन संविधानको मा चाहिँ आर्टिकल 12, आर्टिकल 18 र आर्टिकल 42 मा चाहिँ सेक्सुअल ओरिएन्टेसन र जेन्डर आइडेन्टिटीको कुराहरू समेटेको अवस्था छ। आर्टिकल 12 मा चाहिँ राइट टु सिटिजनशिपको कुराहरू छ, आर्टिकल 18 मा राइट टु इक्वालिटीको कुरा र आर्टिकल 42 मा चाहिँ सोशल जस्टिसको कुरा छ भन्दाखेरि चाहिँ अब कुनै पनि नीति निर्माण गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ हाम्रो यो ट्रान्सजेन्डर थर्ड जेन्डरको विषयमा कुनै पनि कुराहरू उल्लेख भएको अवस्था छैन। र अहिलेको एउटा नीति छ यौन तथा प्रजनन स्वास्थ्य, त्यसमा चाहिँ केही कुराहरू चाहिँ समेटेको अवस्था छ। तर म्याक्सिमम रूपमा हाम्रो यो थर्ड जेन्डरको कुराहरू सिटिजनशिप इक्वली राइटको कुराहरू गर्दाखेरि कुनै पनि कानुनको अवस्था बनाएको अवस्था छैन। नेपालको सिभिल एन्ड क्रिमिनल कोडमा पनि कोडको कुरा गर्नु पर्दा पनि त्यहाँ कुनै पनि कुरालाई समेटेको अवस्था छैन। र अर्को समस्या के छ भन्दाखेरि चाहिँ तपाईको थर्ड जेन्डर अथवा ट्रान्सजेन्डर साथीहरूलाई चाहिँ अदर्स भनेर नागरिकता दिने थालेको अवस्था छ। त्यसलाई बेस मानेर पासपोर्टमा पनि अदर्स भनेर राखेको अवस्था छ। र अर्को कुरा चाहिँ के छ भन्दा विभिन्न प्राइभेट सेक्टर र केही गभर्नमेन्ट सेक्टरहरूमा चाहिँ फर्महरू फिलअप गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ मेल फिमेल अदर्स भनेर चाहिँ राखेको अवस्था छ। अर्को चाहिँ हाम्रो इन्टरनेसनल एयरपोर्टमा चाहिँ जुन हामी इमिग्रेसन फर्महरू भर्छौँ जसमा चाहिँ मेल फिमेल अदर्स भनेर राखेको अवस्था छ। र अर्को समस्या के छ भन्दाखेरि चाहिँ अदर्स भनेर नागरिकता लिन चाहने साथीहरू थर्ड जेन्डर साथीहरूलाई चाहिँ अहिले समस्या के छ भन्दाखेरि चाहिँ मेडिकल प्रुफको जरुरी भएको अवस्था छ, सेक्सन्स गर्नुपर्ने अवस्था खालको एउटा कुराहरू उठेको छ। भर्खरै पनि हाम्रो एउटा समिति छ राज्यको पुनर्व्यवस्थापन समिति, जुन समितिले चाहिँ इफ तेस्रो लिङ्गी अथवा थर्ड जेन्डर साथीहरूलाई चाहिँ नागरिकता लिनु छ भने चाहिँ उहाँहरूले चाहिँ आफ्नो मेडिकल प्रुफ ल्याउनु पर्ने भन्ने एउटा संविधानलाई चाहिँ एउटा गलत संविधानको एउटा मानव अधिकारको उल्लङ्घनको कुराहरू लिएर आएको अवस्था छ हैन। अर्को कुरा चाहिँ तपाईको अब नेपालको कन्टेक्स्टमा चाहिँ अब एज अ थर्ड जेन्डरलाई त्यस्तो भनौँ न अहिले चाहिँ एकदमै धेरै एक्सेप्टेन्स छ फ्यामिली लेभलबाट सोसाइटी लेभलबाट। तर जति पनि लहरू बन्नुपर्ने पोलिसिजहरू बन्नुपर्ने त्यसमा चाहिँ खासै राम्रो चासो देखाएको अवस्था छैन। जस्तो इक्जाम्पल मसँग पहिला पुरुषको नागरिकता थियो र पछि मैले चाहिँ अदर्स भनेर 2015 मा चाहिँ मैले नागरिकता परिवर्तन गरेँ। र समस्या के भन्दाखेरि चाहिँ सेक्सको कोलममा चाहिँ अदर्स राखे पनि तर नाम जसरी अहिले मैले भूमिका श्रेष्ठ भनेर चिनाएको छु तर मैले मेरो भूमिका श्रेष्ठको नाममा चाहिँ मैले नागरिकता लिन पाएको अवस्था छैन। स्टिल त्यहाँ चाहिँ मेल नेमै राखेको छ। र अर्को कुरा चाहिँ रिसेन्टली मैले मेरो सर्जरी पनि गरेँ, मेरो सेक्स रिल्याक्सेसन सर्जरी पनि गरेँ मैले। र मैले चाहिँ अब नाम परिवर्तन गर्न पाउनुपर्छ भनेर मैले हाम्रो यता म्युनिसिपालिटीमा बारम्बार मैले धाएको धाइ छु, तर नाम परिवर्तन गर्न अझ पनि समस्या भएको अवस्था छ। र अर्को चाहिँ अब अहिले 2077 मा चाहिँ हाम्रो नेपालमा सेन्सस हुँदैछ। सेन्ससमा पनि अदर्स यौनिक तथा लैङ्गिक अल्पसंख्यक सेक्सुअल ओरिएन्टेसन जेन्डर आइडेन्टिटी भएको व्यक्तिहरू प्लस अदर्स भनेर राख्ने कुराहरू आएको छ, राख्ने कुरा भएको छ। र हामीले सोचेको जस्तो चाहेको जस्तो पोलिसिजहरू चाहिँ अहिलेसम्म नेपालमा भएको अवस्था छैन।
Okay, I just have one question over here. Once you got your name change done, could you go to cast a vote with your new papers?
Yes.
You could, okay. So at least that much recognition is happening once you get your name change done, even though the government is not doing much.
Yes.
Right. Okay, thank you so much, Bhumika. And from Bhumika, we will move on to Aradhiya Khan from Pakistan. Aradhiya, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hi, Aradhiya. Could you please shed some light on the current legal and policy situation in Pakistan around trans identities and
So,
transgender people?
in 2018, we actually achieved one of the biggest achievement in for the trans right. We actually got our own transgender person bill, which was passed by the National Assembly, which was one of the, I think, hallmark achievement for the whole community. But I think later on, it is divided on a provincial level. It's being still implemented because on this Sindh province level, I am from the Sindh, it's still being implemented. Where else you look in Punjab and KPK, it has been approved. But there's a lot much done by the government. If we talk about the CNICs in 2018, we also got a suo motu by the Chief Justice, where we are actually allowed to get an ex-CNIC card and a
Okay.
passport, which is the era I also got my CNIC card, because before that I was also traveling and getting my work done with a male CNIC card. The later on, into education sectors, there's been a lot of awareness and a lot of policies being developed that no discrimination against students from the transgender community. Because if I share my personal experience, I got my education from a boys' college because there was no male, female, or other columns. Things have to be still done, but I think if we talk about change, there slowly, gradually has to come. Um, Later on, we talk about police uh, and law enforcement. There's a lot of workshops and training and sensitization awareness is being done for the law enforcement, because a lot of harassment and abuse
Right.
is being done because later this year, even a lot of transgender were murdered in Karachi, Sindh, Punjab, and Peshawar, mostly done by their lovers. And
Mm-hmm.
if you go to the police and law enforcement for filing a report, you face various kind of harassment, abuse, because they're not aware of this. So there's a such program that is being done for their awareness and sensitization. We are currently in Sindh, we are working on the implementation of Transgender Act and Policy 2020. And
Okay.
we are also working to get an old age home for the elderly transgenders. Um, can you repeat the question again if there's anything I've been missed?
So it's mostly laws and policies around trans identity and trans acceptance.
I
I
guess
have,
I've covered the current happening, but I can
yeah.
suggest Uzma can also share some light on that.
Sure. In the next question, actually, we will be asking Uzma to add on to that. But I just wanted to ask you one thing. The act that is being promulgated in Sindh, will it be
Yeah.
applicable in the other provinces as well, or will it be only limited to Sindh?
So after the bill was passed, the provincial assemblies are independent to actually
Right.
amend and implement in the current law which was passed. So
Okay.
because different provincial assemblies make their own law with the current existing, with more amendments, like in the Sindh law, we are also talking about the surgeries, of the
Okay.
transgenders. We're also putting the laws that um, transgenders cannot have their hairs that is cut by their gurus or some
Mhm.
guys who abuse or assault them, mostly from the gangster community. And also, we are adding a law that a trans person can easily have their surgeries and hormonal therapies, which is kind of new because earlier times it was not supported. So yeah, these are few things which we additionally added in the policy which is
Okay.
going to be passed by the Sindh government in
All
Sindh.
right. Okay. That's quite a change, and hopefully,
Yeah.
something good will come out of it. So thank you so much, Aradhiya. And from you, we shall move to Sri Lanka. So Thenu Ranketh from Sri Lanka. So Thenu, please shed some light on the legal and policy situation around trans issues and trans identities in Sri Lanka.
Yeah, first of all, I beg your all pardon because my webcam is not working properly, I think. So, okay. When we come to the Sri Lankan context, while there has been some incremental progresses such as the gender recognition certificate, which allowing transgender persons to change their gender marker in official legal documents. The laws
Right.
and regulations such as Section 365, which prohibits
Mm-hmm.
carnal intercourse against the order of nature, and Section 399 for cheat by personation and pregnancy ordinance remains in effect. And the state legally document the gender of an individual to be the
Mm-hmm.
gender male or female and registered on their birth certificates. For transgender persons, the ability to have their gender recognized in official documents is an essential and fundamental part, as we know, the right of life and dignity. In Sri Lanka, the national identity card, which is a compulsory about 16, and passport are issued based on the birth certificate, and such documents are needed to access the employment, education, housing, international travel, public and private services, and such legal matters. Before 2016, Sri Lankan law had not provided a clear path to changing legal gender.
Right.
The transgender people were rarely able to obtain a national identity card and other official documents that reflect their preferred name and gender. I mean, before 2016, especially in wartime, it was very hard for the community to, in terms of security, because the contradictory identity documents exposed them to constant and humiliating examinations about their gender identity, including from armed forces and polices at the checkpoints, staff and government departments and public hospitals, employers,
Right.
and bank tellers, so on. And also to include and receiving state welfare, the public has to be registered at the village also, which actually impossible and annoying for the transgender person. They have to face a lot of discrimination in front of the village officers, and some families do not like to register them under the village officer, thinking that it will be an insult to the family. The transgender people who wish to take the gender identity on their official legal documents face a bureaucratic obstructions also. The government officials handle such applications uh, in an ad hoc manner, and even they rejected some applications to change gender in official documents. So in other cases, the agencies subject them to arbitrary and invasive or burdensome procedures. They include having to produce evidence of the gender transition and reassignment surgeries, prepare appropriate letters from the parents explaining how they acted as a child, and having to repeat explanations for different officials of their experience of transition, violating the privacy of the person. So
Uh,
that is the actual situation
Thenu,
before 2016.
your voice is
And
getting cut off every now and then.
yeah, yeah. Is it clear now?
Yeah, it's clear now.
Is it clear?
Yes, yes.
And because of that this procedure that disappointed some transgender persons have recorded objections with the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka in 2000, end of the 2015. In response and as a result of following many discussions among the community organization, activists, allies, and stakeholders with the intervening of Human Rights Commission, the Health Ministry and the Department of Registrar General formulated a policy on the issuance
Okay.
of gender recognition certificates for the transgender community in order to make the necessary changes in their birth certificate and all other legal documents that gender marker. This policy contains clear guidance for medical professionals and also the government officials on the procedures to be followed when changing the gender identity on official documents. And it doesn't mandate gender reassignment surgery, but the diagnosis of a psychiatric in a government hospital and register under a psychiatric department of a government hospital is a must. And this makes it easier and remove some barriers in documents for trans individuals to access government welfare schemes, employment opportunities, education, and ownership of the properties and vehicles owned. And actually, these government guidelines are not as powerful as an act from the parliament, but they do have legal authority when following these procedures over years and years. But the proposed these guidelines are very important step as it is the first of their kind in Sri Lanka and has been implemented recognizing the transgender community. So the changes is actually a revolutionary move that clear the way for community to live respectfully, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, that's the provisions from government for the transgender. Yes. Yeah.
Right. Thenu, thank you so much. So, what we see is that like almost every country has some policies in place, some laws in place, and all the countries we have tabled today have very robust constitutions, right? Each of them has like a separate area for fundamental rights and directive principles, and all the fundamental rights are generally on paper very inclusive. So obviously a lot of legislations may follow which on paper are also very inclusive. Policies may follow which may make things easier. But now we come to the second part of our roundtable today, where we are going to actually look at how the same laws and legislations can also create barriers and also create issues of access, which some of our panelists have already mentioned. So for that, I would like to first call on, no, before I actually call on anyone, I would just want to add one thing. Given the colonial hangover that some of the countries at the round table have, we still have the penal code that is being carried with us, where in some countries, as Thenu just mentioned, it's section 365 of the penal code. In other countries, it's 377 or 377A. So these things carry on coexisting along with legislations which are being passed that are pro-transgender people, pro-LGBT rights to an extent. So how does that affect the entire situation? And for that, I would like to call on Ho Chi Minh Islam from Bangladesh to shed some light on what kind of obstacles are created and how does the law disappoint, and how do transgender communities not realize their rights despite having some rights on paper. So Ho Chi Minh, can you hear me? Would you like to speak in Bengali or would you like to speak in English?
Thank you so much. আমি ইংরেজি বাংলা দুটো মিলিয়েই কথা বলবো, সো এটা আর কি আই থিঙ্ক যখন আমি বাংলা বলবো তখন একটু ট্রান্সলেট করে দিলেই ভালো হবে আর কি। থ্যাংক ইউ সো মাচ অ্যান্ড গুড আফটারনুন, শুভ বিকেল সবাইকে। আশা করছি সবাই ভালো আছেন। অসাধারণ একটা ডিসকাশন হচ্ছে আমাদের প্রত্যেকের এখানে। সো আমি যেটা বলতে যাব সেটা হচ্ছে যে ট্রান্সজেন্ডার আজকে রাইট নাও ইন দিস আফটারনুন উই আর টকিং অ্যাবাউট ট্রান্সজেন্ডার রাইটস ইন সাউথ এশিয়া। I also on perspective of Bangladesh, what is happening here. So the point is when we're talking about transgender rights, so in Bangladesh there is no any single law or resolutions or policy or anything else which belongs to the transgender community. What did the government mentioned in 2013 about the hijra policy তারা ওটা মেনশন করেছে হিজরা পলিসি হিসেবে, যেটা 2013-এ করা হয়েছে সরকারের একটা রেজুলেশন আর কি। তো ওখানটাতে হিজরা একটা পলিসিতে হিজরাদেরকে একটা লিঙ্গ হিসেবে স্বীকৃতি দেয়া হয়েছে, কিন্তু সেখানে ট্রান্সজেন্ডারদেরকে মেনশন করে কোনো কিছু উল্লেখ করা হয়নি আজ অবধি পর্যন্ত। এবং একটা ব্যাপার যেটা, সেটা হচ্ছে করোনার প্যান্ডেমিকের সময়ে যখন আমি ফ্রেন্ড মিলে, আমরা ট্রান্সজেন্ডার দুজন ফ্রেন্ড মিলে বা আরো অনেকেই মিলে কাজ করতে গেলাম, কাজ করতে গিয়ে সরকারের বিভিন্ন সেক্টরের সাথে, বিভিন্ন প্রতিনিধিদের সাথে, বিভিন্ন জায়গা থেকে যখন কথা বলতে শুরু করেছি, তখন আমি একটা পজিটিভ রেসপন্স পেয়েছি, সেটা হচ্ছে দে আর টকিং অ্যাবাউট ট্রান্সজেন্ডার, অ্যাটলিস্ট দে আর using the word transgender, এবং they are very interested to work on that. সো এটা আমার কাছে ভীষণ ইন্টারেস্টিং মনে হয়েছে। কিন্তু এখানে বিশাল বড় একটা ঝামেলা পেকে আছে, যেটা আমি বলতে চাই, স্টেট এন্ড দ্য গভর্নমেন্ট স্টিল রেকগনাইজ করেনি ট্রান্সজেন্ডার শব্দকে বা ট্রান্সজেন্ডার কমিউনিটিকে। দে অনলি রেকগনাইজড হিজরা কমিউনিটি। কিন্তু হিজরা এবং ট্রান্সজেন্ডার দুটোর ভেতরে যে কিছু ফারাক, কিছু তফাৎ, কিছু ডিফারেন্সেস আছে, সেই ব্যাপারগুলোকে নিয়ে কোনো কথা বলা বা সরকারের কোনো উদ্যোগ এটা কিন্তু নাই। এখন যেটা হয়েছে যে আমরা যখন গুগলে সার্চ করি ট্রান্সজেন্ডার লিখি, ওটার বাংলা চলে আসে হিজরা, আবার হিজরা লিখে তার ইংরেজি জানতে চাইলে সেখানে চলে আসে ট্রান্সজেন্ডার। তো যেটা হয়, আমার হোয়াট আই ফিল অ্যাকচুয়ালি ইন আওয়ার কান্ট্রি, ইন আওয়ার সোসাইটি, আমাদের এখানটাতে যারা এই ব্যাপারগুলো নিয়ে কাজ করে বা করতে চাইছে কমিউনিটির বাইরে থেকে, সিস জেন্ডার হেটারোসেক্সুয়াল মেন উইমেন বা বাকি যারা আমাদের কমিউনিটি বিলং করে না, যারা এই ব্যাপারগুলো নিয়ে কাজ করছে, তাদের কাছে তো শব্দের প্রয়োগের ব্যাপারে বিশাল বড় একটা গলদ ডেফিনেটলি আছে। তারা যে শব্দটা সেন্সিটিভ না, সেই ইনসেনসিটিভ শব্দটাকে তারা ইউজ করছেন বা লিখছেন। তো এই জন্য আমি তাদেরকে দোষ দিব না, কারণ রাইট ইনফরমেশনটা পাস হয় না টু দ্য সোসাইটি অ্যান্ড দ্য আদার্স পিপল, ইভেন ইন দ্য সিভিল সোসাইটিতেও যায় নাই। তো এটা একটা ব্যাপার। কিন্তু সরকারের যখন নীতি নির্ধারণী পর্যায়ের মিটিং বা কোনো কিছুতে যখন আমি বা আমরা যাই অন বিহাফ অফ দ্য ট্রান্সজেন্ডার কমিউনিটি, এবং যখন আমরা সম্মিলিতভাবে ট্রান্সজেন্ডার এবং হিজরা কমিউনিটি উভয়ের অধিকারের কথা বলতে গিয়ে যেটা আমি ফেস করছি, সেটা হচ্ছে যে আমাদের যে হিজরা কমিউনিটি, সেই হিজরা কমিউনিটির বেশ কিছু মানুষ এখন বলছেন যে এটা আমাদের বিশাল বড় অনেক আগেকার আন্দোলন, আমরা অনেক আগের থেকে আন্দোলনটা করে আসার পরে আজকে সরকার আমাদেরকে রিকগনাইজ করছে, আর তোমরা তো ট্রান্সজেন্ডার হাতে গোনা মাত্র 4-5টা মানুষ, তোমাদের তো আসলে কোনো কিছু নয়, তো তোমাদের অধিকারের কথা যদি তোমরা বলো, তাহলে তোমরা এবার আলাদা করে কথা বলতে শুরু করো, তোমরা আমাদের সাথে এসো না, তোমরা এসে আমাদের অধিকারের ভেজাল পাকিও না, বা আমাদের অধিকারটা সরকার আমাদেরকে দিচ্ছেন, কিন্তু সরকার যে অধিকারটা তাদেরকে দিচ্ছেন, সেই অধিকারে যে শব্দ সরকার ব্যবহার করছেন, সেক্সুয়ালি ডিসেবলড, তাদেরকে বলা হচ্ছে যৌন প্রতিবন্ধী। তো একটা সরকার, স্টেট রেজুলেশন, ল, আইন, মানুষ, আমি বা অন্য কেউ কাউকে প্রতিবন্ধী, সেক্সুয়ালি ডিসেবলড বলতে পারি না, এটা বলার অধিকার, রাইটস রাখি না। যদি সরকার বলে থাকে, যদি স্টেট বলে থাকে, যদি ল বলে থাকে, তাহলে সেই বলার মধ্যে গলদ আছে, ভুল আছে। সেটির ব্যাখ্যা যখন চাওয়া হচ্ছে যে কোন ভাবে, কোন সেন্সে তারা বলছে যে এটা একটা সেক্সুয়াল, হিজড়া মানে হচ্ছে একটা সেক্সুয়ালি ডিসেবলড, এবং হিজড়ার যে ডেফিনেশন তারা ওখানে দাঁড় করিয়েছে, সেখানে কিন্তু প্রথম লাইনেই বলেছে যারা যৌন প্রতিবন্ধী। এটা একটা ব্যাপার। এবং যেটা একটা খুব চরম বাস্তব এবং সত্য কথা, যেটা আমি কলকাতায় দেখেছি, সেখানে ট্রান্সজেন্ডার নেটওয়ার্ক বা ট্রান্সজেন্ডার বোর্ড আছেন, পাকিস্তানে ট্রান্সজেন্ডার বোর্ড আছেন, আমরা জানি সেখানকার কেউ একজন পার্লামেন্টেও অলরেডি চলে গেছেন, সেখানে গিয়ে কথা বলছেন, বা এখানে আজকে আরো সাউথ এশিয়ার যে আনাদার কান্ট্রিজ থেকে রিপ্রেজেন্টেটিভরা আছে, তো ওখানেও কিন্তু অনেক ভালো ভালো অনেক কাজ এগিয়েছে। তো এখন পর্যন্ত যে কথাগুলো এই প্যানেলগুলো থেকে আমি শুনলাম, তার মধ্যে আমার মনে হলো যে বাংলাদেশে অনেক পিছিয়ে আছে আর কি। তো যেটা হচ্ছে যে এখানে আমাদের ট্রান্সজেন্ডার দেরকে রিকগনিশন করে সরকারের ওরকম স্পেশাল কোনো কিছু নাই। সো বিকজ অফ দ্যাট, when I face discrimination, when something bad happened with me, I can't go to the law enforcement agency to take the help. So এটা কিন্তু আমি পারি না, বিকজ আমি যখন থানায় যাব, পুলিশে যাব, what will I say? Who am I and what is my identity? So every single citizen, if গভর্নমেন্ট যদি কাউন্ট করতে চায় তো সেখানে মেনশন তো করতে হবে, থাকতে তো হবে, বলতে তো হবে যে এটা এরা আমার দেশের জনগণ, সিটিজেন, দে and they deserve the equality, equal rights like others like man and women. তো ওটা তো নাই এখানে, ওই রেকগনিশনটা তো এখানে একদমই নাই। তারপরে যেটা হচ্ছে, সরকারের যখন বিভিন্ন নীতি নির্ধারণী পর্যায়ের মিটিং হচ্ছে সেখান থেকে কিন্তু সরকারের লোকেরাই আমাদেরকে ডাকছে, ট্রান্সজেন্ডার কমিউনিটি রিপ্রেজেন্টেটিভদেরকে ডাকছে, এবং আমরা যখন যাচ্ছি কথা বলতে গিয়ে দেখছি ওখানে শুধুমাত্র হিজড়া কমিউনিটি মেম্বারদেরকে নিয়ে কথা হচ্ছে বা কাজ করতে চাইছে। তো যখন আমরা আবার আমাদের অধিকারের কথা বলছি তো তখন সেখানে কিন্তু একটা ক্লাশ, একটা কনফ্লিক্ট কিন্তু লেগেই আছে। এবং এই যে একটা বিভেদ সৃষ্টি করা বা বিভক্তি সৃষ্টি করার যে একটা পায় তারা একটা ট্রান্সজেন্ডার কমিউনিটি এবং হিজড়া কমিউনিটি দুটোর মধ্যে, আমি মনে করি যে দুই কমিউনিটির ভিতরে ডিফারেন্সেস কিছু তো আছে কিন্তু লটস অফ সিমিলারিটিস মেইন মানে আছে, কিন্তু আমাদের কিন্তু সিমিলারিটিসও অনেক বেশি আছে। তো কাঁধে কাঁধ রেখে যদি আমরা চলতে চাই তাহলে কিন্তু আমাদের কাজটা অনেক সহজ হয়, আমরা হয়তো অধিকারটা খুব সহজেই আদায় করার পথে হাঁটতে পারি। কিন্তু এখানে যে একটা কনফ্লিক্ট এবং ক্লাশের ব্যাপারটা আছে সেটা কিন্তু বিশাল বড় একটা ব্যাপার। এবং এই ক্লাশ এবং কনফ্লিক্ট যারা তৈরি করছেন তাদের অনেকেই কিন্তু খুব নামি দামি পিএইচডি ডিগ্রিধারী, যারা কিনা ইউরোপ আমেরিকায় পাশ্চাত্যে বসে পাশ্চাত্যেরই খেয়ে এবং পাশ্চাত্যেরই তারা সমালোচনা করে বলছেন যে সেই মোঘল আমলে, মোঘল সাম্রাজ্যের সময়ে তো তখন যে হিজড়াদেরকে যে ভাষায় যে বা যা যে শব্দগুলোতে হচ্ছে করা হতো সেই শব্দগুলো হারিয়ে গেল কেন, তারা আজকে সেই কথা বলছেন। কিন্তু ট্রান্সজেন্ডার যে একটা আমব্রেলা টার্ম, এটার মধ্যে যে আরো অনেক কিছু থাকে, অনেক কিছু আছে, অনেক ব্যাপারগুলো আছে, সেটা নিয়ে দে আর নট টকিং অ্যাবাউট দিস থিংস। ওই রিসার্চাররা জোরে সোরে লেগে পড়েছেন এখানে হিজড়া একটা লিঙ্গ সরকার বলেছেন সেটাকে এস্টাবলিশ করার জন্য। সো এই যে সিভিল সোসাইটির কিছু পশ্চাদপদ চিন্তা, রিসার্চ, গবেষণা যেটা কিনা কোথায় এই ধরনের জেন্ডার, সেক্সুয়াল মাইনরিটিস কমিউনিটির মানুষগুলোকে একটা জায়গায় দাঁড় করিয়ে একটা প্ল্যাটফর্ম থেকে অধিকারের কথা বা ইকুয়ালিটির কথা বলবে, সেটা না হয়ে কিন্তু এখানে আমি যেটা দেখতে পাচ্ছি আমাদের বাংলাদেশে, আমি আমার দেশের নিন্দা করছি না, খারাপ বলছি না, হোয়াট ইজ হ্যাপেনিং হিয়ার দ্যাট ইজ শেয়ারিং, আমি সেটাই শেয়ার করছি। এমন না আমি আমার সরকারের, আমার দেশের নিন্দা করছি, কিন্তু দিস থিংস আর হ্যাপেনিং হিয়ার, এটা হচ্ছে। এবং আমার মনে হয় যে আমরা যখন অধিকারের কথা বলি, স্পেশালি ট্রান্সজেন্ডার এন্ড এনি আদার জেন্ডার্স, যে ব্যাপারগুলো নিয়ে কথা বলি, মাইনরিটিস কমিউনিটি, ইটস নট আ ন্যাশনাল ইস্যুস, আই থিংক ইটস আ গ্লোবাল ইস্যুস। দ্যাট মিনস ইজ নট যে আমার দেশে আজকে রাইটস আমি পেয়ে গেলাম আর আরেকটা আমার পাশের দেশে রাইটস পাইনি, সো আমার তো মাথা ব্যথা। ইটস নট লাইক দ্যাট। অলওয়েজ আই থিংক ইটস আ গ্লোবাল ইস্যুস এন্ড উই উইল হ্যাভ টু টক। যেখানেই যেটা হচ্ছে আমাদের পার্ট অফ দ্য ওয়ার্ল্ড, উই হ্যাভ টু স্পিক আউট এন্ড উই নিড টু টক অ্যাবাউট দিস। তো এই ধরনের গলদ, এই ধরনের এক ধরনের বুদবুদ তৈরি হচ্ছে এখানে, যেটা আমি বুঝতে পারছি যে একটা তলে থেকে কোনো একটা কলকাঠি নড়ছে, যেটা কিনা আমার মনে হয় যে কোথায় আমরা মাইনরিটিস কমিউনিটি মানুষগুলো একটা জায়গায় দাঁড়িয়ে সামনের দিকে হাঁটবো, সেটা না হেঁটে কিন্তু আমাদের মনে হচ্ছে আমরা এখানে বিভক্তির দিকে চলে যাচ্ছি, এবং একটা বিভক্তি ঘটতে পারে বা ঘটার সম্ভাবনা আমরা দেখতে পাচ্ছি, যেটা আমার মনে হচ্ছে। আমি একটা কথা বলবো যে সরকার এবং সরকারের নীতি নির্ধারণী পর্যায়ের অনেক মানুষের সাথে যখন আমি কথা বলতে গেছি, এবং আমাদের জাতীয় সংসদের মেম্বার অফ পার্লামেন্টের সাথে, কিছু মেম্বার অফ পার্লামেন্টের সাথেও যখন আমি কথা বলছি, যারা কিনা এই ল লেজিসলেশনের জায়গাগুলোতে দেখেন, কমিটিগুলোর মেম্বার, দে আর ভেরি ইন্টারেস্টেড, তারা কিন্তু খুবই ইন্টারেস্টেড এই ট্রান্সজেন্ডার ইস্যুস নিয়ে, ব্যাপার নিয়ে কথা বলতে। সো আমাদের অ্যাক্টিভিস্ট এবং এই যে রিসার্চার, গবেষক যারা বলছেন মুঘল আমলের সেই হচ্ছে যে লিঙ্গীয় ডাইভার্সিটি বা যে আছে সেগুলোর যে শব্দগুলো তারা খুঁজে বের করছেন, সেগুলোকে নিয়ে এক ধরনের গলদ পাকিয়ে আমার মনে হয় যে এখানে অনেক করা হচ্ছে। তো আমি একটা কথা বলতে চাই, সেটা হচ্ছে যারা এই ধরনের গবেষণা করেন বা করছেন, তারা কি একবারও চিন্তা করেননি যে সেই মোঘল আমলে তখনকার ট্রান্সজেন্ডার কি তখন ছিল না? ডেফিনেটলি ছিল। তখন কি হিজড়া ছিল না? ছিল। তখন কি অন্য আদার সেক্সুয়ালিটির মানুষ ছিল না? ছিল। তাদেরকে ঠিক কিভাবে ট্রিট করা হতো? তখন কি খুবই সম্মান দেয়া হতো, নাকি এখন অধিকারের কথা বলে যারা লড়াই করে সম্মান হাসিল করছে বা সম্মান পেতে চেষ্টা করছে, তাদের অবস্থা আজকে ভালো? এই জিনিসগুলো তো চিন্তা করতেই হবে, এগুলোকে নিয়ে তো ভাবতেই হবে। তো আমার মনে হয় যে কিছু পজিটিভ লাইটস I can see in my country, that some who are law like যারা ল তৈরির ব্যাপারে কাজ করেন কথা বলেন তাদের অনেকের ভেতরে ট্রান্সজেন্ডার ইস্যুস নিয়ে আমি পজিটিভ ভিউ দেখছি এবং কাজ করার একটা স্পৃহা দেখছি এবং দিস ওয়ার্ড ইজ লাইক ট্রান্সজেন্ডার শব্দটা ইউজ হচ্ছে অনেক জায়গাতে এখন যদিও সরকার ওভাবে মেনশন করে নাই বলে নাই এই যে ব্যবহারটা হচ্ছে আমার মনে হয় এই ব্যবহারে একটা সময় খুব পজিটিভ একটা লাইটস নিয়ে আসবে আর কি
You know, like a word has a lot of power. Now, automatically what happens is when you start using an umbrella term, you start looking at people in a more expansive manner, especially if there are many groups that are not getting along well. Now, just having government policies using a word like transgender instead of just hijra or trityolingo or something like that automatically creates space for further improvements in laws, legislations, and policies. So that is something that we will also see in some other countries where, you know, very similar situations are happening. But so right now, I would like to move to Mith Mukherjee of India. Mith, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, Mith, can you please, from your personal experience, can you shed some light on how laws and policies are actually working at the ground level for transgender people in India?
First of all, thank you for choosing me for this great meeting. And first of all, I would like to say that, okay, from my personal experience, I'm a trans man. And for transgenders here in India, basically, like what we suffer from few days back, that COVID pandemic situation was there all over world actually. But in India, like as I belong from Bengal, so our CM Mamata Banerjee ma'am assured that to transgender community of Bengal for free ration scheme to cover us with till Jan to 2021. Okay, the state government free ration scheme admits that COVID pandemic will also cover transgender till June 2021. The state government of Mamata Banerjee has, however, announced free ration under the same PDS scheme that covers 7 crore beneficiary with 3 kg rice and 2 kg wheat. Okay, in Bengal. The state has decided to issue tokens, the process of which has already started to help the people from transgender community who have been badly hit since lockdown due to the outbreak of coronavirus. So, but my question is this, that the amount of ration is enough for us? Is it enough? Like only with 2 kg rice and 3 kg wheat, what can we do with this quantity of ration? So this is the big question. What because as I can say that so many transgender people who are not able to stay with their family because of their sexuality, because they didn't get any acceptance from their family. So many transgender people are used to stay alone. And so many people, like not only transgender, so many people lost their job for this pandemic situation, and till they are also not getting any job. They are jobless. So I must say that it's a request to our government that please look after this. That I know I can't take the name. I know a transgender woman that she belongs from Krishnanagar. Okay, and she is a very good student. She got a gold medal in mathematics and all. But her childhood was really very painful. That she used to stay in orphan age, and now she's not getting a single help from government and anything, that she's not able to sit in exams also, just because of finance problem. She don't have that much money to pay her fees and all.
Mith, I need to ask you one thing over here. Is this because of COVID, or was this situation already there before COVID happened?
There before, but due to COVID, it's like
it's become worse.
She's suffering more. Yeah, absolutely. And she used to call me that Mith. Yeah.
Yeah, no. So I'll go back to her. I just wanted to ask you one thing from a legal standpoint. Given the fact that you identify as a trans man, what are the barriers that you've faced? Have you faced any issues with your identity cards, your passport, your
From
voter's
my
ID
family,
card?
from family, I never faced any this kind of problem. Okay, because they're very happy. Always, my dad used to say, okay, do whatever you like. We don't have any problem with you. Like you can wear jeans, you can cut your hair short. When it was 2016, I joined one call center. Okay, the
Okay.
process was SBI process, and there I faced some issue, not with my training part. When I hit to the floor, okay,
Right.
there are like, what kind of guy is this, that she is a female, but always she used to wear jeans and all formal dress, like a boy and all. This uh, but it doesn't matter to me at all, because I know what I am, and I can't. In fact, I did that job for last 8 months. After that, I left
Okay.
that job. But that is a different part. That's a different issue. But yeah, I have my all documents, but still it is like not for transgender. I never mention it.
Right.
It's female only. Yeah. But now
Okay.
for this, as I already told you that about that ration card and all.
Yeah.
So it was for transgender. So when I went to
Right.
ration office of here in Barashat, they asked me that, what you wants to mention yourself, like what do you want to write, it's female or male or transgender. So when I asked them, okay, because my all documents are female, so you can
Yeah.
mention it here as well as female. But they told me, no, you can't do that, because it's only for transgender people you are getting this ration, and also you need to put that transgender only. Then I said, okay, I don't have any problem with that, make it, because maybe in future it will be help me to convert my all documents to transgender and all. And this much I can say. And these problems are like always we are habituated with all these things, that okay, you are like, you are not from our community and all. The so-called people who used to call them that they are straight, I always used to tell them that, see, nobody is straight and all. That is a different part. So for me, I can say this much. And I'll request to our government that please look after those who are actually lost their job, and basically especially transgender people who are not able to stay with their family because of the acceptance and all. So many transgender people are there, like who was not able to eat also properly.
Very true.
So
And I think that is something that we have seen across South Asia, though it is not just limited to India,
absolutely,
unfortunately, because of
absolutely,
the
absolutely.
social structures that there are. Meet, thank you for sharing
Thank
with us. I would like to ask Rukshana to point out where the policies in Nepal have not exactly met up to the expectations of the community, and also how name changes, etc., across documents can be quite difficult at times. Rukshana, are you
Hi.
there? Yeah,
Yes, yes,
hi.
I'm here. Am I audible?
Hi. Audible, visible, everything.
Thank you. Okay, so this is Rukshana Kapali, identify as trans women, pronoun she and her. So to quickly begin with, there are a lot of issues, and I'm like, how can I cover all of them in a very short period of time? So I'll try to be as productive as possible. So in the last decade, an image of Nepal that often LGBTI-friendly country has been promoted, disseminated through various national and international media outlets. This claim is widely reported, and many people believe that queer people in Nepal have afforded all possible legal rights. It's common to hear that Nepal referred to as a beacon of LGBT rights, or that Nepal has some of the most progressive laws regarding LGBT rights. It's also believed that Nepal is especially progressive when it comes to addressing rights of transgender people. How did this image of Nepal as a country friendly to the transgender community in particular become so prominent, considering the reality of numerous bureaucratic, administrative, and legal barriers? So let me first try to debunk this narrative that, okay, so Nepal was never colonized by British people, and so it's like we don't have to deal with that mess. But it's important to debunk this myth of colonization. British people may not have directly taken control over the region, but the state authorities, in particular the Rana regime, were very close with British India. So we cannot completely state that colonialism, British colonialism, hasn't impacted Nepal at all. So let's begin from how a person's documentations are decided, or are like the process of like a very complex network of how documentation of an individual works in Nepal. So there is a law that states that every new infant's birth needs to be registered within 30 days of their birth. So that's how you get birth certificate. When you're enrolled to a school, you must present your birth certificate, and the name and gender in your birth certificate will be registered in your school. There's an examination that's taken on grade 8, and for appearing that examination, you must present your birth certificate, and the name and the gender on those birth certificate will go in your grade 8 certificate. Similarly, there's another board examination at grade 10, which also requires you to present your birth certificate as well as your grade 8 certificate. And both of the certificate must have like the congruent names, and the same name and gender would be applied to your grade 10 certificate. And then you pass like the further examinations, all the documents from the birth certificate, you have to present them, and then the same name and the same gender would be applied. Now, similarly, to apply for a citizenship, you need to present your birth certificate and your educational certificate. So the name you're filling on the form for the citizenship and the gender you're filling in the form of the citizenship must be congruent with your birth certificate and your educational certificate. That's how, like, there is a very complex network of like different documentations and the process and the requirements. And similarly, citizenship is the key to everything in Nepal. Like from getting a basic SIM card to buying a land in Nepal, you need your citizenship. Getting a passport, you need your citizenship. So like almost everything, like if you become an adult, like even enrolling a university, you need your citizenship. So basically, I think a lot of things comes and gets stuck in citizenship. And to get a citizenship, you need to have like your birth certificate and your educational certificate. Now,
sorry, not to interrupt, but when you say citizenship, you mean a particular ID card, right?
Yes. So yeah, so a citizenship ID card, and you're eligible for a citizenship ID card only after you're 16.
Okay.
So now let's look towards like all of these different documents are now governed by different acts available in Nepal. And let's look at all of these different acts. There is National Identity Card and Vital Registration Act of 2076. We use a different calendar year. And there's a clause 25 that states about amendment of a birth certificate. There is an act called the Correction of Age, Name, and Surname 2017. And it also talks about like the correction of name and not gender. There's also a directive on operation and management of secondary level education 2068, which also which governs the educational certificate of the school level. And there is Nepal Citizenship Act of 2063 that governs the citizenship. So all of these different acts that govern different documentations of a person, all of them in cumulative mention that you can only change your name if there are minor or trivial spelling mistakes, or if there are like certain typical middle names that are like incongruent. For example, you have a middle name in your educational certificate and not in your citizenship, then you can ask like your citizenship to be amended, like including the middle name or like removing the middle name from your educational certificate. So that is the only possibility for someone to be able to change name. And there is no laws that actually say you can change your gender. Now, saying that there are certain loopholes that transgender people in Nepal are exercising. For example, you might have heard of the very famous 2007 landmark. Now, you may have heard a lot of positive sides about this landmark, but there are a lot of negative implications that have come across with this verdict. And in that whole bunch of negative impacts, I'm going to more focus about on transgender rights. One of the positive impact of the 2007 verdict, and another verdict that was very recently 4 years ago passed, was gender identity was defined as a subject of self-determination and not for medical verification, or not to be verified by another person, society, or legislation. So this is a positive thing that we can take forward, but none of the laws actually, sort of like reflect this verdict at all. one of the consequences of the Supreme Court's ruling in 2007 was inclusion of others as a gender options in official documents. Now, saying that different bodies, different ministries, and different documentations have their own sort of narrative about what is this third gender option. So the Supreme Court ruled that there needs to be a third option, and different ministry took it into power to decide what the third option is. Some said it's others, some said it's third gender, and some said it's gender and sexual minorities. So it's really different across what different documentations you're applying for. Now, saying that, we also have a old passport, like a machine readable passport, but it's not machine readable because in Tribhuvan International Airport of Nepal, if you take that passport, then it will not read in the machine at all. And then you'll have to fill another sort of handwritten form, and then you'll be questioned, and you'll be kept there for 15 minutes, which is always my experience every time I travel. Now, another important document is a ruling by Ministry of Home Affairs, who promulgated a directive on issuing citizenship certificate to people from gender and sexual minorities community. So they were able to put their gender marker in citizenship as others. Now, this verdict defines others' gender to be LGBTI. So basically in Nepal, it defines that LGBTI is a third gender, which is already so problematic because okay, it's mixed up the whole sexual orientation, gender identity, and sex characteristics things. It also there is this trend in Nepal where the term transgender in English is translated as third gender in Nepali, which has caused another conflict to a problematic understanding that being transgender is being third gender, which we and me personally are trying to break it off. There's also this took a headlines that Nepal has included third gender from the previous census and is including a third gender in this census, which is so a very superficial narrative, because I read all the questions that was officially published in the government gazette, and there were more than 42 questions, and only in one question in that whole 42 questions they had something called gender, male, female, and others, and there were all many different questions which also asked a gender breakdown, but all of those questions only had binary options, and this one question had a 3 gender option. So now it's been reported across media that Nepal is going to have a very LGBTI friendly census, which is so wrong and which is so problematic, and I don't know why these media people don't talk to activists working in the ground level, and from where they bring all of these different things that does not even exist here. So saying that, another problem is that Nepal has a very deep-rooted Hinduistic sort of Hindu nationalism ongoing everywhere, and it really also impacts the transgender rights movement, because there are a lot of people who there is a lot of hatred created towards transgender people who do not identify as third gender. So as a trans woman, I would like to take female. I identify as a woman. As a trans man, though he would identify as a male. So we binary trans people are shunned, and there is prompted, encouraged, and propagated rampant fear and transphobia within and beyond the third gender community in Nepal by prescribing that anything beyond the Hindu-centered third gender identity is a threat to the community. So we also get a lot of attacks because, oh, why aren't you saying third gender because you're transgender? But no, I'm a trans woman, which means I am a woman. We call this kind of narrative Tritiya Vadi narrative, or the trinarist narrative, that we're trying to really break down right now. I would say that 2017 and 2018 would mark the second wave of the LGBTIQ rights movement. We also use an abbreviation called POM Sojisek. We call it POM Sojisek, which is people of marginalized sexual orientation, gender identity, and sex characteristics, which is more encompassing than what we say LGBTI rights. This second wave of narrative sort of brought a lot of discourses, and one of the very important discourses was the discourse of language. To remind, Nepal has 123 languages spoken across the country. So we have around 2 languages right now where we're having discourse about LGBTIQ vocabularies. And we were successful to bring the term transgender in Nepali language, which we would call paralankik vyakti. And with introduction of this term, now we didn't have to like have a translation of transgender person as a third gender in Nepali language, and we could use the term transgender in Nepal language, which is really catered us trans men and trans women who identify as men and women respectively.
Right.
Yeah.
It's
So I
created
think there are
space.
some 2020 marks a year of a lot of demand charters that we published. For example, in 31st March 2020, to International Transgender Day of Visibility, we published the National Transgender Demand Sheet, which was like, which for the first time in Nepal put forth a demand asking that trans men should be recognized as men and trans women should be recognized as women, with a lot of different other demands. Then we had like on 17 May, we also had another national charter of demands on legal recognition of gender identity, which included like different issues from intersex persons, transgender persons, non-binary person, also from third gender persons, and also from persons who didn't want it to like take a gender marker at all. And we also covered a lot of different issues on language, privacy, etc. We also had intersex demand sheet released on October 26th, very recently. And yeah, so it's basically that there's also like sort of activism that's going on regarding, you know, sort of self-determination and more wider range of recognition rather than a very monolithic narrative of third gender. And but the barriers are not just from the cis het community, but also from the third gender community itself, like with the Tritiyavadi narrative. So yeah, I think
Right.
I sort of covered a lot of different things. I'll also send,
Yeah.
I can also drop a link, Google Drive link that has a lot
That'll
of
be
different
wonderful.
collections about
That'll be
things
wonderful.
going around in Nepal. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Rukshana. Actually, what you gave us was quite a comprehensive overview of a lot of things that are going on, and they're very similar in narratives to what we have already heard of in Bangladesh, and various other countries also like have some similarities with what's been going on. And especially within the region, there's a language focus around Tritiyolingo, around third gender, Tesolingo, and so on and so forth. So with that, I would like to come to Uzma of Pakistan. Uzma, can you hear me?
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, Uzma. Yeah.
Hi.
We can't see you though, I think. No, can
I
we?
turned on my camera. Can you see me now?
Oh, yes. You're
Okay,
visible.
nice.
Sorry, it was a delay on my side. So,
Fine.
Uzma, what is since Aradhiya already kind of gave us an overview of the good things that are happening with laws, legislations, and policies, what are the actual access barriers that you can see, given the fact that your organization has been working around these issues for for quite a while now? And is the community actually benefiting from the legislative process, from the policy process?
Thank you very much, Deepjyoti. What Aradhiya said, I will just build on that. Technically, Pakistan never needed Transgender Protection Act because Pakistan's constitution in general, which was actually passed back in 1973, it actually guarantees almost 22 fundamental human rights provisions and fundamental human rights guarantees under the Constitution of Pakistan, which covers education, health, inheritance, other rule of law, and protecting the life clauses included. And it also says very clearly that these rights are guaranteed fundamentally without any discrimination of gender, sex, race, religion, caste, language, etc., and the list goes on. But somehow it was felt that then when I was also listening to the other colleagues from other parts of South Asia, I could realize that why this was important for Pakistan to have its Transgender Protection Act. So when you say that how much community is benefiting out of that, so that's a very multi-layered question, and it's a very tricky. There's no straight yes or no. It all depends at who you are within community and where you're coming from, who you are associated with, what is your academic background, what is your family background, and what is your relationship with your family. Because law clearly says that no one can be offensive on your right to inheritance, education, employment, even to hold a public office and to run for public office, to right to vote. And one thing which is very interesting, that We had right to vote for transgender people before we had Transgender Protection Act. Pakistan had its Election Reforms Act in 2017, and under clause 48 of that act, it was guaranteed that transgender people and persons with disabilities both, they can have a right to vote and they can also hold, they can run for public office. So that was a development which is pre-Transgender Protection Act in Pakistan. Taking benefits from this act, it's a long journey. There are many layers of the community itself. There are some people who are privileged enough that their family accepted, although the ratio is very low, but we cannot miss them when we mention about the benefits. So they were privileged enough, their family supported them, they could continue their education. Now they have completed their education, they are part of mainstream industries, they are part of mainstream employment sector, whatever they feel like, even if they want to be in technology, if they want to be human rights, if they want to pursue a political career. Then there is a huge majority who was living under highly underprivileged circumstances, and for them this act is not very much welcoming. Community is not very happy. I'm talking about the grassroots community, because they think it is bringing some additional responsibility as well. Because, for example, it says that you have self-perceived gender identity and expression, and which means that you can go and change your national citizenship card according to your perceived gender identity and expression. But the problem is that majority of transgender community who identified themselves as a woman, but they happen to marry cisgender heterosexual women out of family pressure, social pressure, etc., etc. Now they are confused that how they can go and change their citizenship ID card identities. And also many of them are not ready to quit their right as a male family member, who identify themselves as a transgender woman, but they're not ready to leave that privilege of a male inheritance share. So all these problems are going hand to hand. And but the good thing is that we had 5 transgender candidates in our last general election in 2018. After this election act was passed, we had at least more than 2014 transgender registered voters. We had 125 election day observers throughout Pakistan. We had 25 long-term election observers. So on this side, we see a lot of improvement, which is actually supported by this law. When it comes to right to education, we see some development is there. All public universities and private universities are bound to accept transgender candidate without any discrimination and stigma. And to further encourage it, many universities have offered free courses. They have waived off tuition fee. They are encouraging transgender people. They are making this advertisement very clear on social media and newspapers or national TV channels that they encourage transgender people to come and get admitted in the universities and colleges and schools. But it will take some time. As of now, it's been 15 years that I'm working with transgender community and for transgender community. So I see it will at least take next 50 years to make it a huge success, that it's a normal thing. It's a normal thing to have your transgender colleague, your transgender siblings, your transgender politicians, your transgender doctors, your transgender lecturers and professors in universities, because change is in process, change is in making. But sadly, there is still a huge part of the community which I fear would be left out, because they are either not ready to accept the change, or perhaps they lost all those opportunities earlier, which they could have availed, and they could have been part of this right umbrella. And also Pakistan is very lucky when it comes to transgender people's right, despite that we are having some of the transgender killing in Pakistan in past few months. But at the same time, we see that Ministry of Human Rights is quite active. And just on this International Human Rights Day, they announced to have a safe space for transgender people called Trans Shelter, which means they will be providing shelter for transgender people who are either victim of domestic abuse, intimate partner violence, parents have abandoned their child. So that is actually state giving that space that you are safe here, you can stay here until you find an alternative way to sustain your life. So this is an overall picture here in Pakistan.
Okay, before I move on to our member from Sri Lanka, Moli, I just wanted to ask you, in Pakistan, like how we've seen various identities being conflated in other countries in South Asia, is Khwaja Sira also conflated with transgender? Or are they two separate, like in the vocabulary, are they treated as two separate identities?
It is conflicted. It's pretty much conflicted, and majority of transgender people are those, or at least who are on visible side of the picture, are those who are educated and who do not believe in Guru Chela system. You know, Guru Chela system. It's very much indigenous system in communities. So they are part of, they don't want to be part of that system, and they identify themselves as a transgender, and they do understand, or at least how they explain it, that they are in transition, you know, from their gender assigned at birth to gender they prefer or they perceive. But then there is an identity which is Khwaja Sira, and majority of people who are under the system of Purujila system, they want to be known as Khwaja Sira.
So right now, I would like to ask Molly what the current actual, like the grassroots level scenario is when it comes to trans people actually managing to access laws, policies, etc., which are supposed to work in their favor. Molly, can you hear me?
So I'm going to talk about the legal status of the Sri Lanka. First of all, Thenu's lacking in all things, but there are no other things to mention. In particular, there are no provisions of law accept or getting their basic rights here, but it's only recognized to change documents that we are acceptable by the government. DS, I mean the Grama Sevaka Niladari, and part of the psychiatrist or endocrine from medical sector. But the Grama Niladari don't implementing it properly when operating the grassroots level. There are no convenient places for themselves to change their documents except in the certain or particular places, including those are provinces in Colombo or Kandy or Jaffna or Batikalo. But usually they go from place to place, as mentioned to other places, because the authorities concerned don't find any understanding or awareness of that kind of. And NGOs are unable to carry out work related to this. Also, anything flexible from here, anything flexible vacancies for their able bodies as noted by Thenu, like, you know. And other thing, there are the reasons is that is the mention that they were renamed in on of the 13 boxes except the front which it's referred to as the male or female. So when they go to work, they find out by lacking at the 13 box mentioned in the birth certificate and all the documental certificates, they need full documents. But it's somewhat possible that men or woman is mentioned on the national identity card, passport, and college certificates and university certificates. Other thing, I don't know what kind of structures here because there are no any structures, no any law or provisions, no. So there are no structural things. There are only so many issues like this here. So I can explain it some things like that issues. And if we concern the medical sector, if we going to the medical sector, they are the conservative society. They knows men or women like that. They don't know LGBT. What is the LGBT? If we are saying like I'm a trans woman or I'm a queer woman, I'm a queer boy, they are asking what is that? Like those things in here, in the Tamil, particular the Tamil community. In the other provinces, in the Colombo or Kandy or Kali, other things, like they have like a awareness. Very, very hard to find out in Tamil society and Tamil people also. Other thing, I have no mentioned thing to say about, because Thenu already mentioned it, all things like, because we have only ERC, gender recognized certificates. Other thing,
Right.
everything all are bad, I think.
No, that itself says a lot. If you don't have much to say, that says a lot itself, you know.
Yeah.
So it just goes to show that most of the things that are there, they're very little, very few and far between. And what is interesting in what you mentioned is that NGOs find it difficult or are unable to work in creating situations where things can become easier. Now, Molly, thank you so much for sharing that with us. And now I think we are going to open up the floor for questions. I've already got a few questions to ask everyone. No, actually, no, before we do the questions, perhaps let's do the third round and then we can do the questions. So my first question in the third round for our Bangladeshi speakers is, what has the response of the government been during COVID? And I'm asking this to both Joya and Ho Chi Minh, because, you know, during COVID, we've all seen that the world almost came to a standstill. A lot of difficulties are faced by everyone in general. But Ho Chi Minh, being a healthcare worker, perhaps you could share some particular experiences with us. And Joya, you being a founder of an organization that works with LGBT issues, maybe you could also share what kind of COVID response you had from your side.
আচ্ছা আমি বলবো?
Yes, yes. Ho Chi Minh, please. তুমি বলো, তারপরে জয়া আপা তুমি একটু বলো।
ওকে, সো এই কোভিডের সময়, করোনারি প্যান্ডেমিকের সময় গভর্নমেন্ট থেকে ট্রান্সজেন্ডার মানুষদের জন্য কি করা হয়েছে সেটা আর কি, যেটা আর কি যখন এই কোভিডটা শুরু হলো, প্যান্ডেমিকটা শুরু হলো, ঠিক সেই সময় থেকে তো অনেক মানুষ কাজহীন হয়ে পড়ছিল, এবং একটা চরম সত্য এবং বাস্তব কথা যেটা, ট্রান্সজেন্ডার কমিউনিটির মানুষরা আমাদের এখানে স্টিল যেটা করা হয়, তাদের যে জীবন জীবিকা ওটা তো কামস ফ্রম দ্য ক্রাউড থেকেই তো আসে, যেখানে জনরণ্যের মধ্যে থেকে তাদের সেই জীবিকাটা জীবন যাপনের জন্য চলে আর কি। তো সেটাই যখন থেমে গেল, লকডাউন যখন পড়ে গেল, তো তখন তো নিশ্চয়ই তারা তাদের যে জীবন যাপনের যে পাথেও সেটা বন্ধ হয়ে গেল। তো এবং আরেকটা ব্যাপার যেটা, সেটা হচ্ছে বলতে দ্বিধা নেই যে এই ট্রান্সজেন্ডার কমিউনিটির খুব ভালো একটা পোর্শন কিন্তু তারা সেক্স ওয়ার্ক করে আর কি। সো সেই যে জায়গাগুলো যখন ক্লোজ হয়ে গেল, জীবন জীবিকার সবকিছু, তো তখন তারপরে যেটা হলো যে 17 মার্চের পরে সরকার অফিসিয়ালি লকডাউনটা অ্যানাউন্স করে ইন বাংলাদেশ। তারপরে 29 মার্চ পর্যন্ত আমি প্রচুর রকম করে অবজারভেশন করছিলাম সোশ্যাল মিডিয়াতে, তার বাইরে যে কোথাও থেকে কোনোভাবে কোনো রকম করে সরকারের তরফ থেকে ইদার সরকারের বাইরে কোনো এনজিও বা কোনো কিছু তরফ থেকে কোনো সাপোর্টের কথা বলা হচ্ছে কিনা বা হবে কিনা ফর দ্য ট্রান্সজেন্ডার কমিউনিটি ইন বাংলাদেশ। বাট 29 March পর্যন্ত আমি দেখছি no one is talking about transgender peoples. Peoples are only talking about leftist party doing their work for their own peoples who are poor, and rightist party they are working for their own peoples who are poor. So no one is talking about marginalized people like transgender, hijra, sex worker community. No one is talking till that time, 29 March. So after that, I started working with my friends for the transgender community, hijra community, and sex worker community to distribute the foods and other necessary goods. So ওই কাজটা আমি তখন করছিলাম। করতে যাবার কিছুদিন পর তখন দেখলাম যে যখন আমরা কথা বলছি, আমরা বলছি যে আমাদেরকে নিয়ে কেউ কথা বললো না, এই ট্রান্সজেন্ডার মানুষদেরকে নিয়ে কেউ কাজ করলো, নট ইভেন দ্য এনজিও, যে এনজিও বাংলাদেশে কাজ করে, they exposed themselves as a transgender based NGO or hijra based NGO. তারাও খুব চুপচাপ ছিল, শান্ত সৃষ্ট ছিল, এবং আমি বলবো যে that NGO is like a godfather. So এই গডফাদার এনজিও যে ওয়ান এনজিও 94 থেকে দাবি করে আসছিল দে আর ওয়ার্কিং ফর দ্য কমিউনিটি। আই এম সেইং লাইক দিস, আমি হয়তো খুব হার্শ গলায় কথা বলছি ব্যাপারটাকে নিয়ে, বাট আমি একটা পয়েন্টে অবশ্যই এগ্রি করি অনেকের সাথে যে দে আর ওয়ার্কিং ফ্রম 90s, তারা 90s থেকে কাজ করছে, দে হ্যাভ সাম গুড ওয়ার্কস ডেফিনেটলি, সেখানে আমি দ্বিমত পোষণ করবো না, বাট নাও ইট ইজ হোয়াট ইজ হ্যাপেনিং অ্যাকচুয়ালি অ্যান্ড হোয়াট দে আর ডুইং, অ্যান্ড লাইক দ্যাট ইজ মাই কোয়েশ্চেন। ইন দ্যাট পার্সপেক্টিভ আমার কণ্ঠ হার্শ হয়, আমি ক্রিটিক করি এবং সেই ক্রিটিকটা আমি করেই যাব। সো তারাও সাইলেন্ট ছিল, তারাও
সেটা তোমার অধিকার।
হ্যাঁ, তারাও সাইলেন্ট ছিল, তারাও কিন্তু সেই সময় পর্যন্ত কথা বলছিল না। তারপরে দেখলাম একদিন হুট করে তারা একটা ডাটা বের করে দিয়ে দিয়েছে, দে নিড 50 লাখ টাকা ফর সার্ভিং দ্য ফুডস অ্যামং দ্য হিজরা অ্যান্ড ট্রান্সজেন্ডার কমিউনিটি। সো they're not in the like রাস্তায় নামেনি কাজ করতে শুরু করেনি, তারা ফিগার আউট করে 50 লাখ টাকা লাগবে, they're collecting the money. So this is my question. তো যেটা হলো যে তখন আমি আমার ফ্রেন্ড আমরা মিলে যখন সিভিল সোসাইটি আর যারা এখানে বাংলাদেশে আছেন, আমরা we are seeking help in that time. It was really amazing for me. আমি যে এক্সপেরিয়েন্সটা তখন পেয়েছি from the people, সাধারণ জনগণ, they helped us a lot, এবং ইন্ডিভিজুয়ালি তার হেল্প করছে, নট অন বিহাফ অফ এনি এনজিও অর অর্গানাইজেশন। ওটা একটা। তারপরে একটা ব্যাপার যেটা পিএম আমাদের প্রাইম মিনিস্টার তিনি প্রেস কনফারেন্সে সে ডিরেক্টলি বলছেন যে এই কমিউনিটির মানুষদেরকে উনি স্পেশালি উল্লেখ করছেন থার্ড জেন্ডার কমিউনিটি, নট জাস্ট ফর দ্য হিজরা কমিউনিটি। এখন এখানেও একটা তো দারুণ একটা পলিটিক্স দাঁড় করানো হচ্ছে, থার্ড জেন্ডার মানে কাদেরকে ভাবা হবে, এখানে এত বাজে বাজে ইন্টারপ্রিটেশন ঘটে চলছে।
আমি তোমাকে ইন্টারাপ্ট করবো, আমি জয়া আপাকে বলবো একটু এই থার্ড জেন্ডার কমিউনিটি নিয়ে যে ভার্সেস হিজরা, মানে এই পুরো ব্যাপারটা পলিটিক্সটা কিভাবে মানে ঘেটে হয়ে গেছে কোভিড এর সময়, আমরা ওটা অনেক জায়গায় উল্লেখিত দেখেছি। জয়া আপা, if you don't mind, can you just expand on that?
থ্যাংক ইউ দেবজ্যোতি, খুব একটা ইন্টারেস্টিং কথা বলার জন্য, যে বাংলাদেশের পলিসির দিক থেকে থার্ড জেন্ডার, তৃতীয় লিঙ্গ, হিজরা, এই শব্দগুলি নিয়ে ঘোরপাক খাচ্ছে আমাদের গভর্নমেন্ট এবং পলিসি লেভেলে, যে বিভিন্ন সময় যে ঘোষণাগুলি আসে, যেমন কোভিডের সময় প্রাইম মিনিস্টার থেকে ঘোষণা আসছে থার্ড জেন্ডার মানুষকে সাপোর্ট করতে হবে, তাদেরকে সহযোগিতা করতে হবে কোভিড-19 সময়, তারা যাতে কোনো সমস্যার সম্মুখীন না হয়। তারপরে যখন এই যে রিসেন্টলি একটা ঘোষণা আসলো যে তৃতীয় লিঙ্গের সম্পত্তি অধিকার, রিসেন্টলি 9 নভেম্বর, এই নভেম্বরের 9 তারিখে এই ঘোষণাটা এসেছে যে তৃতীয় লিঙ্গের সম্পত্তির অধিকার। কিন্তু এই যে তৃতীয় লিঙ্গ শব্দটা এবং হিজরা শব্দটা এভাবেই আসে, বেসিক্যালি যে শব্দটাই মানুষের জন্য ব্যবহার করা হবে সেই শব্দটা কিন্তু আসতেছে না। আমি যদি বলি যে গতকালকে ঢাকা ত্রিভুবনীতে একটা প্রেস কনফারেন্স ছিল, সেই প্রেস কনফারেন্সে কিন্তু ডিসকাশনগুলি ঘুরে ফিরে মিডিয়া যারা আছে তাদের কাছে কিন্তু তৃতীয় লিঙ্গই চলে আসে। তো আমি বারবার তাদেরকে প্রশ্ন করছি যে তৃতীয় লিঙ্গ মানে কি, তাহলে প্রথম জেন্ডারকে, সেকেন্ড জেন্ডারকে, এখানে কি জেন্ডার বৈষম্য হচ্ছে? নারী কি তাহলে মিডল জেন্ডার, আর তৃতীয় জেন্ডার কি হিজড়া, এই ট্রান্স মানুষরা? তাহলে এটা কিভাবে হয়? এখানে তো জেন্ডারের কোনো প্রশ্নই আসে না।
So just to understand what you're saying, আপনি যেটা বলছেন আমি ওটাকে ইংরেজিতে বলছি, কারণ I take two. Because of this entire confusion where the press are constantly using the term third gender instead of using transgender, they're not using an expansive or inclusive term. They are constantly looking at a particular politicized group, which, do you think it is because your Prime Minister also uses this term, as Ho Chi Minh just pointed out?
এটা হচ্ছে এখানকার পরিস্থিতি। তো আমি সেই সাথে কোভিডের বিষয়ে কাজগুলির কথা আমি একটু যোগ করে বলে যাচ্ছি এর সাথে। তো কোভিডের সময় আমরা যারা কাজ করেছি, বাংলাদেশে যেসব অ্যাক্টিভিস্টরা রয়েছে তারা কিন্তু আসলে কোনো এনজিওর দিকে তাকিয়ে ছিল না। হো চি মিনের কথা একটাই, যে যেসব এনজিওরা কাজ করতেছে তাদের এই বিষয়ে ঝাঁপিয়ে পড়া দরকার ছিল, কারণ তাদের কাছে অনেক ডাটাবেস, অনেক কিছু রয়েছে এইসব কমিউনিটির উপরে, যারা হিজড়া, ট্রান্সজেন্ডার এবং আদার সেক্টর মাইনরিটি নিয়ে কাজ করতেছে। কিন্তু সেই ক্ষেত্রে আমরা যারা অ্যাক্টিভিস্ট, আমরা কিন্তু সোশ্যাল মিডিয়াতে প্রচুর লেখালেখি করেছি। যে কোভিড-19 শুরু হওয়ার পরে লকডাউনের এক সপ্তাহের মাথায় আমি দেখলাম আমার কমিউনিটির লোকজন আমাকে নক করতে শুরু করে। সেখানে বেসিক্যালি ট্রান্সজেন্ডার সেক্স ওয়ার্কার যারা, তারা আমাকে অনেকগুলি বিষয় ফোনে নক করতেছে যে আমাদের লকডাউন হওয়ার কারণে আমরা বাইরে বেরোতে পারছি না, কাজে যেতে পারছি না, আমরা পয়সা রোজগার করতে পারছি না, তাহলে আমরা কি করে বেঁচে থাকবো? আপনার কাছে যদি বিষ থাকে তাহলে বিষ আমাদেরকে দেন, বিষ খেয়ে মারা যায়। আমি এই কথাটা একদম ফেসবুক পোস্টে আমি লিখেছি। তো তারপর থেকে আমি ফেসবুকে লেখালেখি শুরু করি এবং অনেক দেরি করে আমি এক্সট্রা বিকাশ এবং অ্যাকাউন্ট নাম্বার দেই যে সাহায্যের জন্য। সেই থেকে অর্থনৈতিকভাবে আমরা যে অর্থ সংগ্রহ করলাম সেই অর্থের মাধ্যমে ঢাকা শহর তো দিয়ে আমরা সাপোর্ট দিয়েছি, ঢাকার বাইরের জেলা শহরগুলিতেও আমরা এই কমিউনিটির মাঝে সাহায্য পৌঁছে দিয়েছি। এরই মাঝে আমাদের বিভিন্ন বন্ধু যারা বিভিন্ন ইউনিভার্সিটিতে যাদের সঙ্গে কাজ করতাম, তারা বিভিন্ন জায়গাতে আমাদের জন্য ফান্ড রেজিং এর কাজ করেছে। তার ভিতরে একজন কাজ করছে নেদারল্যান্ড থেকে, একজন কাজ করেছে ইউএসএ থেকে, আর আমার দুজন বন্ধু যাদের সঙ্গে ফিল্ম এবং ডকুমেন্টেশন আমি কাজ করেছিলাম, তারা ইউকেতে থাকে, তারা ইউকে থেকে এই ফান্ড রেজিং এর কাজ করে। এই ফান্ড রেজিং গুলি যদি না হতো তাহলে কোভিড-19 এর সময় মনে এই মানুষগুলির মুখে আমরা খাবার তুলে দিতে পারতাম না এবং তাদেরকে যে সাপোর্ট গুলি সেগুলি আবার দিতে পারতাম না। গভর্নমেন্টের সাপোর্টটা কিন্তু অনেক শেষের দিকে বা মাঝামাঝি সময়, সেটা কিন্তু ঢাকা শহর ব্যাপী হয়নি, জেলা শহরগুলিতে একবার তাদেরকে দিয়েছে। তো একবার যদি একটা জনগোষ্ঠীকে খাবার দেয়, সেটা এক সপ্তাহই হোক বা 15, তো বাকি দিনগুলি তারা কি খাবে? বাকি দিনগুলি তাদের জন্য ব্যবস্থা করতে হয়েছে আমাদের। তো সেই বিষয়গুলি আমাদের অনেকই মানে এই যে অর্থ সংগ্রহের ব্যাপার, অনেক পরিশ্রম করতে হয়েছে, যোগাযোগটা বাড়িয়ে দিতে হয়েছে। এটা খুবই একটা কঠিন সময় আমরা পার করেছি কোভিড-19 এই লকডাউনের সময়।
Actually, এখান থেকে I would like to ask our participants from Nepal, both Rukshana and Bhumika, Joya and Ho Chi Minh both highlighted the actual conditions of transgender people in Bangladesh during the COVID-19 situation, where the governmental response was lacking and NGOs were also extremely slow in acting because of various political pressures possibly, but they did, the activists did do some work individually because that was the only way forward. So did you also see that kind of a reaction in Nepal? Like I know Rukshana's organization was involved in part of the COVID response. Could you please highlight certain aspects?
So during COVID situation in Nepal, so governmentले चाहिँ हामीलाई कुनै पनि कुरामा सपोर्ट राम्रोसँग गरेको अवस्था छैन, because of गभर्मेन्टले चाहिँ नेपालको सिचुएसनमा यो ड्युरिङ कोभिडको बेलामा चाहिँ महिला र पुरुषलाई चाहिँ जुन खालको सुविधाहरू उपलब्ध गराएको अवस्था थियो, हामीलाई चाहिँ यो एलजीबीटीआईक्यू कम्युनिटीको लागि चाहिँ कुनै पनि कुरामा सपोर्ट गरेन। र ब्लू डायमन्ड सोसाइटीको इनिसिएसनमा चाहिँ हामीले हाम्रो आफ्नो एलजीबीटीआईक्यू कम्युनिटीको समुदायको साथीहरूलाई चाहिँ यो खाद्यान्न अनि राहत वितरणको सेवाहरू उपलब्ध गराएको थियो हैन। अर्को चाहिँ के छ भन्दाखेरि गभर्नमेन्टले कुनै कुनै म्युनिसिपालिटीले चाहिँ सपोर्ट गर्नुभएको थियो यो हाम्रो केही ट्रान्सजेन्डर साथीहरूलाई, एलजीबीटीआईक्यू कम्युनिटी साथीहरूलाई, तर बजेटको यो गभर्नमेन्टले ल्याउनु पर्ने सपोर्ट अनि तपाईको यो हरेक यो ड्युरिङ सिचुएसन छ नि, यो आई मिन यो कोभिडको सिचुएसन बेला जुन खालको एउटा नीति एउटा पोलिसिजहरू बनाउनु पर्ने थियो इक्वालिटीको हिसाबमा चाहिँ त्यो कुनै पनि कुरामा चाहिँ भएको छैन र आई थिंक रुक्सानाहरूले पनि राम्रोसँग गर्नु भएको छ होला त्यसमा चाहिँ यो सिचुएसनमा चाहिँ कसरी ह्यान्डल गर्ने हाम्रो आफ्नो वन कम्युनिटीको लागि भनेर चाहिँ र खासै गभर्नमेन्टबाट चाहिँ कुनै पनि सपोर्ट छैन थ्यांक यू
Thank you, Bhumika. Rukshana, would you like to add to that?
We didn't do a lot of like direct service providing stuff, but we had done a research on what are the issues. Like we had around 200 participants, like, and we did research on what it was the immediate like what we were facing, and we had this feminist and queer charter demands for COVID-19 response with other different like organizations collaborated, and we also had this what are the issues faced by LGBTIQ persons during this pandemic right now. And yeah, I think a lot of issues where like the government were giving free aid and food, but it was very limited, and like you had to prove that you were poor, and you had to get a recommendation letter from the local government that you were poor. And again, like because a lot of trans people didn't have a citizenship card that was like congruent to their gender identity, then there were a lot of different issues. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Okay, like unfortunately the problems seem quite similar across the board. Maybe Zainab and Mith from India could shed some light on what happened, what has been happening in India. We know Mith has already faced issues with his ration card and not getting enough rations despite being eligible for it. So perhaps Zainab, as part of the National Transgender Council, did you see the government stepping in with a particular sort of response for transgender people?
So there were different things that happened in India at the provincial level and also at the federal level. So one is that the National Council was not formed at the initial impact when the country saw people battling COVID. It was formed much later. But the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment and the National Institute of Social Defense did a one-time cash transfer to transgender persons across India. So there was about 2,000 Indian rupees which were transferred. At the same time, there was ration distribution done through the public distribution systems from the government, from the states, from different donors. In fact, just as we speak today, the civil society in India was able to mobilize extra budgetary resources from the Global Fund to look at emergency COVID relief in India for key populations. That means sex workers, people who use drugs, men who have sex with men, and transgenders to get direct beneficiary transfers as well as ration support to whoever may need that. The communities were also very proactive. They tied up with various fundraising, resource mobilization platforms where separate LGBT groups, trans groups were able to mobilize dry ration support. I do personally know of groups of people who also raise money for HRT for trans masculine people. Uh, so the response has been extremely mixed. While we do know, like most of the governments in the region, that the governments have not been extremely proactive when it comes to bringing on board concerns of trans people or other marginalized groups. There are some of the there were several court cases which were filed to make sure that emergency ration support is made available to the most marginalized groups, sex workers, transgenders, etc. And I think these have been some of the concerns which have come in unilaterally across the region. And still, as we talk today, where India still has many cases of COVID, and the prevalence just keeps prevalence and incidents both keep increasing on it. We realize that not all trans people have been able to have equitable access to livelihood like they did before the lockdowns in India started. Transportation from one city to another is still restricted. Uh, Movement in public space is not as restricted as it was before, but still problematic. That's why trans people have lost housing, lost their jobs, were forced to move back to families, their biological families, which could have been transphobic, which could have actually been perpetrators of violence. We've seen a lot of people battle depression, suicidal tendencies. There have been a couple of suicide cases which were reported during COVID period in India. So I think the impact is as brutal as it can get. Trans people and men who have sex with men, along with other people living with HIV, had earlier access, had problems relating to access of antiretroviral, which was then checked in by various civil society and government measures. But the challenge is what happens to people who are already displaced, who are moved out, people who were asked to vacate their premises by the landlords because
Yes.
they were not able to pay rent, asked to leave cities, not able to do any of their traditional or non-traditional occupation, and unfortunately, no social protection schemes or no safety nets were still available for these kind of communities. So unfortunately, the government's response has been largely mitigating impact, but not really looking at the root cause of marginalization or the stigma drivers, which actually continue to push people underground. A lot of transgenders also, because of the fear of segregation and the inadequate medical response to COVID, including sex desegregated wards, where very few COVID centers in India would have a separate ward for trans people. So very few people actually kind of wanted to go ahead, take a COVID test, or go to an institutional quarantine mechanism because they were scared that they would perhaps be discriminated against or they would perhaps not be adequately dealt with. Now, let me tell you my story. I was also affected by COVID. And because I had breast augmentation done, simple breathing exercises or sleeping on my stomach was not possible because it would kind of put further pressure. So I think there was an innate scare of institutional mechanisms during this part because we were not sure how the public health authorities would deal with trans communities or hijra communities or trans masculine communities because there isn't a system in place to deal with so many people who are COVID affected. How would they prioritize marginalized communities? We also did see an increasing wave of Islamophobia in India, where
Oh, yes.
we saw people use different terms to say jihad and equated that with Islam and Islamophobia and COVID spread, people calling us super spreaders, transgender communities in Bangalore, Hyderabad being branded as super spreaders. Some people put up posters saying that avoid hijras, do not give money to the hijra community because these people spread COVID. People from the northeast being looked
Targeted. Yes.
targeted, so xenophobia. So I'm just trying to say that there were so many things that happened. Access was limited. Access today to other cities are still limited, unless you can afford to take a flight out and you can afford to do a COVID test, etc. Access is still limited and people do not know how to still cope with it. There is a unimaginable loss to life and property and livelihoods, and unfortunately there is no studies to see what has been the impact of these on the marginalization status of communities like us.
That actually brings me to what you just said is so pertinent right now, especially because who is important? A tax-paying voting citizen is important as far as the government is concerned. If a person falls underneath the tax-paying category, is that person an equal citizen anymore? Should we even consider that person's wants and needs and stuff? And this is where in the COVID response we can see that very vividly, how just a few mitigating circumstances have been created, but beyond that, in actuality, there's very little that has happened to help and aid primarily the transgender community, transgender men and women, because if you're cis-bodied, it is easier to blend in certain places, in certain situations. But for a trans person, it becomes like the impact and the vulnerabilities are so much higher. And I would like to pose the same question to our partners from Pakistan, Uzma and Aradhiya. Uh, what has the COVID response been like as far as the trans community is concerned? From the government side?
Okay. So, being an organization, the government response was encouraging for transgender people at many levels. There were ration drives, There were free hygiene, sanitation kits for transgender people provided by the government institutions, especially the Health Ministry and Ministry of Human Rights. So on that context, it was very encouraging. And then there were some international partners, donors, UN agencies, civil society organizations from Pakistan, and also private donors who really contributed generously to support these ration drives. And also there was a drive to support trans people with their rents, because majority of them were asked by their landlords to leave the homes because they could not pay. But despite all these positive stories, there was a very deep, dark story of unsafe sex work during lockdowns. And despite that, there were a continuous consultation with the community using the online platforms like telephone, like Skype, like Zoom. We've been telling everyone that you need to be safe, you need to be safe. It's a high time to really take care of your safety. But there were unsafe sex ongoing. And they had a very valid point that we cannot go on the roads for begging, we cannot make our livelihood through dancing and in private functions. So sex work is the only way that we can survive. And of course, the Russian government is giving, or the private partners or donors are giving. It's not sufficient enough to run the entire bills of our house. So which makes sense. I mean, no government, no NGOs or civil society organization can ever give enough to a family of 6 or 7 people to survive. So they continued their unsafe sex work. Their life was at risk, and there is always a reluctance in testing for STDs. So that is the gray side of this COVID-19 for us, and what we experienced, what we see throughout. And the major concern from FTI, because we undertaken 3 research through online surveys and impact surveys. So the major thing was the sexual and reproductive health services were blocked in general. They were suspended in all public and private hospitals because everybody was responding COVID. So those trans people who were in their transitional journey, who were under either taking hormones, who were under taking their surgeries, reassignment surgeries, who were halfway, as Zainab mentioned, that those who were having their breast implants, who were having other cosmetic surgeries, or their reassignment surgeries, they suffered the most because they could not find a way out, who to go, who to approach. And that is another gray area. Along with that, you need more food, you need more medicine, you need more hygiene kits to make sure that you're safe from. And also this, I also noticed that there was a very least concern on providing support or supplies for safe sex, like the condoms, like the contraceptives, and like all other. Many of these female sex workers suffer because they had least access to contraceptive during these days. So yes, lockdown brought many gray stories and many gray areas. Yes, people had food to survive, only the food thing, but rest of the things were compromised in terms of access. And also we learned during this lockdown, because I guess globally it was first time that we all experienced that how COVID has badly impacted our day-to-day life, especially the mobility, restricted mobility, that majority of trans people had no bank accounts. They had no easy paisa accounts. So it was very difficult to transfer them cash. I mean, we could not travel due to lockdown. You were not allowed to be on the road in your car. They had no cars, and they don't have bank accounts, that you can transfer money. So we also learned, and we're really focusing on this functional literacy. We are engaging some banks, commercial banks, based on our this experience, that every trans person should have a bank account. So at least it makes life easier, that you can do some online shopping, you can do some online stuff for yourself, that you don't starve, you're not deprived of medicine, and you have access to all those online stores that can fulfill your day-to-day needs during such pandemic.
And on a similar note, I would like to ask our representatives from Sri Lanka, Thenu and Molly, the same question. What has been the governmental response as far as COVID is concerned with the trans community. I'm sorry, we are running a little beyond our time schedule, so we'll have to wrap up fast, but I still have a few questions to ask at the end of this. So, Thenu, would you like to answer this? Thank you.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible. Thank you.
So as it is the same situation we all the transgender people have gone through during this COVID period in every country. I'm not going to explain about the situation here,
Right.
but very few things that as a general aid, the government of Sri Lanka recognizing the needs of the families. During the crisis, they provided 5,000 rupees, 300 rupees for each household, and it was repeated in May. And in the second wave, the government provided food packs worth 10,000 to each family who were under self quarantine. But these were considered as families. The families were given the welfare. So what happened is, as the transgender persons, they are not with their families. They were already left the family, so they live alone. So they didn't get these provisions because they live in a separate area, which not in the area they have been registered. So they didn't receive this provision because of that. And what we did, we means some organizations and individual activists and allies get together, looking for raising funds and focusing especially on the on providing the economic support and also the psychosocial support, because many has been going through psychological issues due to they couldn't get the healthcare and they didn't have hormones to purchase. So what we did was we provide them financial support to cover their day-to-day expenses, and some were brought food also and medicine, and settle their due rents and supported for the traveling if they want to move to another location for occupation, or if they have asked to if they are evicted by the house owners, and if they face legal matters, they have been provided the legal support, and sometimes temporary housing is provided through the collective efforts of the organizations, activists, and individual allies. So that's what but nothing from the government received by the minority groups.
So the apathy from the governmental side is not just in one country. We can see it's actually spread across the region, which actually brings me to some of the questions that we have with us. I have about 4 or 5 questions already. So the first question is for it's actually for our Nepali friends over here, Bhumika and Rukshana. What is the final position on medical certification in Nepal? Can either Bhumika or Rukshana please answer this?
Okay, let me go.
All right.
So basically, it's like the citizenship. It's a bill to amend the Citizenship Act, and it's so basically it's presented in a committee of the lower house. It was tabled in the committee of the lower house, and the committee passed it to the lower house, and then now it's to be passed by the lower house to the upper house. Then the upper house will again pass it. So it's not a final thing yet, but like a very strong suggestion from the lower house that they would sort of like put it in this in a very problematic way.
Okay. So it's going to be a very long process then. So my next question is for Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh, you had mentioned that the NGOs just want to speak with trans people, but not in terms of rights. So what do you mean by that? Ho Chi Minh, are you there? Can you hear me? I don't think Ho Chi Minh can. Ho Chi Minh, can
If
you
you
hear me?
don't mind, please question টা আরেকবার।
হ্যাঁ, তুমি যখন কথা বলছিলে তখন তুমি বললে যে এনজিওরা ট্রান্স মানুষদের সাথে কথা বলতে চায়, কিন্তু অধিকারের দিক থেকে নয়। They do not want to speak to them in terms of rights. What did you mean by that?
Actually the thing is here, আমার মনে হয় সেটা হচ্ছে যে in Bangladesh now we are in initial like আমরা খুবই starting situation এ আছি, where যেখানে এখনো অনেক কিছু ডিসাইড করা হয়নি, সেখানে রাইটস নিয়ে কথা বলার মতো গ্রাউন্ডও হয়তো ভাবে তৈরি হয়নি। এটা মনে করেন হয়তো বা এনজিওরা যে এনজিও গুলো কাজ করতে চান, কারণ এখানে তো শব্দেরই জটিলতা এখনো ভাঙেনি। সেই সাথে অধিকারের কথা তারা, আমার মনে হয় যে তারা অনেকটা বলতে ইন্টারেস্টেড না, হয়তো বা তারা এটা চিন্তাও করেন যে পলিটিক্যাল একটা প্রেশার তো থাকেই ডেফিনেটলি, তো ওটাকে চিন্তা করে হয়তো বা তারা এটা স্কিপ করে দিয়ে তারা রাইটস নিয়ে কথা বলে না, বাট দে ওয়ান্ট টু শো, তারা দেখাতে চায় বা দেখায় যে তারা আসলে এই মানুষগুলোকে নিয়ে কাজ করবে বা করে বা করতে চায়, ওটা আমার মনে হয় আর কি।
Okay. Thank you, Ho Chi Minh. So
আমি আরেকটা কথা একটু বলতে চাই, লাইক অ্যাজ এ হেলথ ওয়ার্কার হিসেবে করোনার সময়কার যেটা কথা সেটা হচ্ছে যে আমি জানি আমার এক বন্ধু যে হরমোন HRT হরমোন থেরাপির মধ্য দিয়ে যাচ্ছিল, বাট বিকজ অফ দিস করোনা এন্ড প্যান্ডেমিক ও ট্রিটমেন্টটা করে কলকাতায়, বাট বিকজ অফ দ্য করোনা সে যেতে পারলো না, অ্যান্ড ওর ফিজিক্যাল কন্ডিশন অনেক দিনকে দিন খারাপ হতে শুরু করলো। So what is happening here in Bangladesh, there is no like মানে এরকম কোন ডক্টর বা আমাদের হেলথ সিস্টেমে ট্রান্সজেন্ডার হেলথ নিয়ে কথা বলা, not even in any endocrinologist, there is endocrinologist actually এখানে আছে, এক্সিস্ট করে, but they don't treat transgender women or transgender people. So এই হেলথ সিস্টেমের পুরো ব্যাপারটাতে এই সিচুয়েশনটার বিশাল বড় একটা গ্যাপ আছে, এবং এখানে এই ব্যাপারগুলো নিয়ে খুব ওপেনলি কথাও হচ্ছে না। সো বাট আমি আশাবাদী এবং হোপফুল যে আজ থেকে 2 বছর আগেও যেভাবে কথা হতো এখন তার চেয়ে অন্যরকম করে কথা হচ্ছে, আর আমার মনে হয় যে দেয়ার ইজ এ পসিবিলিটি, সো থিংস উইল বি চেঞ্জ, আমার যেটা মনে হয় অ্যাকচুয়ালি। আরেকটা ব্যাপার যেটা সেটা হচ্ছে হেলথ মিনিস্ট্রি এবং স্বাস্থ্য অধিদপ্তর থেকে ওরকম করে কথাবার্তা হতে শুরু করেছে, দে আর ইন্টারেস্টেড টু ওয়ার্ক অন দিস ইস্যুস, ওরা আসলে এটা নিয়ে ভাবতেও চায়, কথা বলতেও চায়, তো সেটাও আমার কাছে একটা পজিটিভ ব্যাপার মনে হয়েছে। সো দের ইজ লটস অফ মানে অনেক বাজে জিনিস আছে বা অনেক কিছু আছে, কিন্তু তার মধ্যে আমি কিছু কিছু জায়গাতে লাইক আমি কিছু আলো দেখতে পাই, সো ওটাই আমার কাছে আসার ব্যাপার যে থিংস উইল চেঞ্জ, অ্যাকচুয়ালি আমার কাছে এটা মনে হয়।
Okay, thank you so much, Ho Chi Minh. With that, unfortunately, we are really running short of time. And, this is just the tip of the iceberg. This discussion has actually opened up so many more discussions. And I think this is just the beginning, and we will have to reconvene at some other point, to talk more about it. And hopefully, we will be able to create a regional change overall. It just doesn't have to be in one country and everyone goes, oh yeah, like we've got like half a law and let's celebrate that. No, every human being deserves to get all their fundamental rights, right? How do we make sure that happens? So thank you so much for everyone coming together today. With this, I would like to hand the floor back to Madhu and Pavan. Madhu, would you like to say a few words?
Well, I can't thank all the panelists enough for this really sort of insightful and critical discussion, because we only get to hear that, oh, there's gender recognition, and this whole tensions that people are talking about, even within gender recognition. What is the identity that's getting recognized? What is getting sidelined? And I really think that this requires, as I wrote in the chat, a much longer discussion. And we know it's going to be a struggle. We know that the marginals somehow always remain on the margin from the history of all the movements that we've seen. but to the extent we can, and I really, like the point that I think a couple of panelists made, that also there is the additional layer of class privilege that gives you greater access. So, while you will then have this kind of very heterogeneous conditions within which trans people are found, some with greater privilege and greater access, and will become emblematic of country successes. And then there are, we know, the deep, dark underbelly, is always the poor. So I do want to thank everyone and really, really value the fact that Devjyoti sort of moderated this whole thing very patient and pinpointed points. And Pawan and Devjyoti both have been part of the entire preparations and putting this together. And of course, I thank Udita, Mrinalini, and Surabhi, who are at the back, sort of facilitating everything, and all the participants. Pawan, I would like you to have the last word. Thank you.
Thank you, Madhu. I think all that I want to say is that tensions are good, because then we really work hard to resolve them and good things come out of those tensions. And as long as we take it in a spirit of debate and discussion. And I think we should definitely have more such discussions, and I'm sure we will get around to organizing some. Thank you so much, Madhu, and the entire PLD team. Thank you, Devjyoti. That was a wonderfully moderated session, and you can see words of praise pouring in the chat box. Thank you, everyone, all the participants, all the attendees, all the speakers. Wish you a very happy New Year well in advance. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the year. Stay safe, and looking forward to future chats with you. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.